za dolgo ali kratko pot. Zdaj lahko poskrbim za svojo družino, ker moje gorivo poskrbi za moj avto. Izboljšani dodatki v gorivih MOL učinkovito zmanjšujejo obloge in tako čistijo motor. Z novo generacijo goriv MOL Evo poskrbite za motor vašega vozila.
Method is what you see here, the exercise prescription for health. This is a prescription we have developed for EFSMA, and it's now distributed in all EFSMA countries, in 28 countries, and I don't know how much translation have been done, but at least 10 or 12. So every country in Europe may use this prescription for exercise. I will come back to the paper here, but this is the concept we try to translate and to explain it to the patient. The actual situation is everybody knows that physical activity in prevention and treatment of diseases has a very high level of evidence with many studies within the last years and even in the last 20 years. There's also strong evidence for rehabilitation by physical activity, and the positive effects of physical activity are also with a high evidence for treatment of diseases such as heart failure, chronic obstructive lung disease, and more. The current situation is shown in this slide. You can see we have a new syndrome. The word is created by the late Joe Kaminski, the exercise deficiency syndrome. This is the term for all risk of cardiovascular mortality with increase of physical activity or decrease of physical activity. That means sitting time. The more sitting time, the more is the risk for future events. The more increase of physical activity is, the lower the risk for some diseases. And there are some details, you can take it with you. Sitting time, the sedentary time, and the activity lifestyle. And you can see that the exercise deficiency syndrome, so we call it, is the most important negative lifestyle as a risk factor worldwide. And the number here are total of 53 billions of premature death worldwide, and inactivity decreases by only 10% every year. So we have to try to increase these numbers and reduce the risk. What is important if we recommend physical activity to our patients and to our healthy subjects? The most important decrease of the risk for disease or for mortality is from starting point no activity to moderate activity. This is the most important step. If you increase your intensity or the amount of activity, you can reduce your risk further, but it's for patients and for healthy subjects important to tell him the first step is to start with any physical activity. Any activity is more than nothing. This has been confirmed, for example, in many studies. You can see this nonlinear relationship has been shown by Upin from France in all peoples older than 65 years. That means even if you are older, you can reduce your risk for dying. And again, you can see there's the most important change in the initial phase from sitting from no activity to moderate activity. And even Sattelmeyer from the Lee group had the same results, and the MORE study in more than 100,000 subjects showed the same results. And this is a nice curve. The risk reduction goes in similar way congruent with a extensive life expectancy and life prolongation. Well, the question often is how much is enough for regular physical activity. I told you it was moderate. There has a large studies by Paul Williams from California. Here is an example, hypertension, running versus walking. And he could show that even regular intensive walking has similar effects with risk reduction than moderate jogging. So again, we have the intensity which is moderate and effective in risk reduction. And this is another important figure. Not only the regular physical activity, but also the fitness is correlated to mortality according to physical fitness. That means the higher your fitness, cardiorespiratory fitness is, the lower your mortality will be in the future. These are numbers you can see. The more the physical activity, the fitness increases, the lower is the mortality rate in the next 5 or 10 years. This is a very high physical fitness, but it's worthwhile to examine the physical fitness on ergometry to have a prediction for the future. So the question is, what is the primary goal of our research? The researchers are in a different way, not in a unique way. Being unfit is a risk factor. Being fit is a very good risk reduction factor. And for the moment, it's not possible to conclude the one or the others. That means we need both measurement, fitness and the physical activity, which has been depends on the questionnaire of the patient. Genetics have, as you can see here, a low contribution, but it is of importance in patients also. This is a summary of the evidence-based indication for prescribing regular physical activity. These are, the numbers here are collected from many, many meta-analysis or single studies, and 1A means it's the highest level of physical activity, and 2B is a lower evidence, but all these diseases have a very high level of physical evidence. Coronary artery disease, heart failure especially, cancer also, osteoporosis, metabolic syndrome, and even chronic kidney disease is now an indication for regular physical activity. In here you see some more evidence numbers, and I only want to stress this line here, cognitive function in dementia. So far, physical activity is the only method, the only drug to prevent or even reduce the occurrence for cognitive dysfunction and dementia. No other drug is effective in this disease. Sorry? Letter A. In the evidence. Yes. No. No. I'm go back. One is 1 and A. The number A indicates the quality of studies supporting this evidence. Yeah? Well, and the next is an argument why we use the exercise prescription, because exercise corresponds also to the similar effect of drugs, or you can say exercise activity is the real polypill, better than the polypill as a drug. And we have indications for many organ diseases. The dosage is similar like in drugs, frequency, intensity, time, and so on. The dose response is present, non-linear, as I showed you before. There are manifold somatic effects, psychoactive effects. Physical activity is a main step for treating, for example, patients with depressive syndrome. The side effects are low, and the contraindications are only the acute illness. So, again, coming back, these are the factors we have to fill out when we recommend the exercise prescription. And it's important because the patient needs a written document when he goes home, and this improves really, according to many studies, especially from Sweden, the adherence after 6 months to physical activity. The general prescribing exercise is shown here. Maintain a physical activity, physical active lifestyle. Moderate endurance training is prescribed here. Vigorous training is a little bit more, but it's less time, and the intensity or the activity can also be given by the Borg scale, respiratory for the exercise prescription. Muscle strengthening is recommended for twice time a week. This is a general recommendation which is given by, as you can see, most of the international societies for physical activity. What is new when we are looking for the personalized recommendation, it's the key measurements, the VO2 max, but in most cases in a practice and so you can't measure the VO2 max, and we have some formulas from Myers and others, so you can calculate the VO2 max from non-exercise data, and this is quite important for the prescription of exercise. You also can go into such a figure from Ostrand. And the next step will be, this is a list or an example of 28 diseases we have compiled for the physician's desk. We have the frequency, intensity, time, duration of a session, and type of training, type of sports, and strength training. And so you go into the table. You can download this from the EFSMA website. Everything is presented at the EFSMA website. And then you have the indication or disease prevention in general, coronary artery disease, and many other diseases, heart failure, rhythm disturbances, and arterial hypertension. You can, for every disease, check for the intensity for a personalized recommendation for the patient. We can skip that. What are the current situation and limitation? We have strong evidence for prevention, for rehabilitation, and for treatment, but many doctors do not give. Many physicians don't use such a prescription for exercise, especially physicians in hospital are not informed, are not educated on these topics, and it's a large deficit in the education of our students. Physical activity is not recommended as a part of treatment, especially in hospital, as I said. It's not included in Germany, for example, in the education of all medical students. They never heard anything on sports medicine or this part. And the reimbursement of this recommendation, this prescription is not regular in European countries. In Germany, nowadays we have our companies, insurance companies, to pay for this prevention, including the exercise prescription. So, coming to the end, tell your patients exercise prescription is a personalized health recommendation for healthy subjects, patients with regular physical activity. Tell them they feel better, they be fitter, they live better and live longer. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Lohan. And now I invite you, Professor Sergio Pecorelli from Italy, to learn us how parenteral physical activity influence the health and wellness of the next generation, future generation.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah.
Is this yours?
Pecorelli, yes.
Okay, great. At the end, you can ask them if they have any questions.
This is open.
Okay.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. And first of all, I want to apologize, but there was a mistake in the title, because the title is parental. That is, man and woman get together and they make a baby, okay? Now, we've heard a lot already about the importance of physical activity. And what I want to concentrate just a moment is this slide, which usually I always show, because this is now where chronic diseases are really founded. And that is the increased non-communicable disease risk that we can have with inflammation. And inflammation is the mother of all of this. Impossible. And of course, the altered immune functions. And we know very well that correct lifestyles and also trying to diminish all the stresses that we know, all of this, of course, is going to help a lot in trying to diminish or even, if possible, delete the inflammation. Having said this, now we can go to the beginning of life. We know extremely well since 2003 by the paper of paper of David Barker that showed that the developmental origins of health and diseases are within the first 1,000 days of life. And they account for about 70% of our future health and well-being. But what I wanted to now to focus this presentation is upon before the first 1,000 days of life, and that is in the preconception. Because that's also where we know today that physical activity plays an enormous role. Well, today we have a preconceptional medicine which aims to identify and modify the biomedical, behavioral, and social risks through preventive interventions. And I summarized these preventive interventions into the main three. Of course, there are many, many more. The first one is the physical activity, and then it's nutrition, and then it's stressors. And today we will concentrate upon the physical activity. Well, we know that environmental factors play a major role, and they exercise, and that exercise by itself modulates the epigenome of somatic cells. But now we are concentrating very much upon germ cells, that is the sperm, spermatozoa, and the oocytes. And we will see that this probably also will change some of our attitudes in medicine. We know very well that lifestyles, and particularly physical exercise, but also nutrition, have the potential to modify the epigenetic landscape of germ cells. And obviously, this is an unprecedented effect upon the health and the wellness of the future generations. And this is going to influence a lot the risk of the chronic diseases through reprogramming of the somatic cell epigenomes. And this may go on for up to 3 generations, which makes 4 because one is the ones that really do have this benefit, that is those who own the spermatozoa and the oocytes. Well, also, at this point, we know that physical activity influences mainly 3 major things. One is the DNA methylation, the histone modification, and the microRNA, the regulation of non-coding RNA, which are associated genes, of course, in humans. All of what I'm going to present you, except one slide, is about humans. But I want to tell you that in the past 15 years, all of the work has been done mainly on mice. And from mice, then finally, we went to humans. Well, we know pretty well that probably there will be a future work on epigenetic inheritance through exercise. And we have to concentrate upon this, mainly because the heritable epigenetic modification augmented the transcriptional programs protective of disease. And they include, of course, the metabolic dysfunction. We can think about diabetes, for instance, the heart disease, the neurodegenerative. Think about Parkinson's disease. Think about dementia and cancer, of course. Well, also, they looked at 397 healthy male volunteers, and they had moderate intensity continuous training or high intensity interval training. And then they looked at the inflammation markers, at the oxidant and antioxidants, at the semen parameters and sperm DNA damage. All of this was measured, of course, thanks to the fact that sperm is readily always available. And this was done at baseline, at weeks 12, 24, and then 7 and 30 days after the training. And what came out was that moderate intensity exercise was superior to the high intensity or the high intensity interval training in the improvement of markers of male reproductive function. And of course, this is going to have a very important impact upon what we want to administer, we want to prescribe whenever somebody really wants, for instance, to conceive, and maybe that he or she, will see, is not really a fit person by your standards. Also, this was done in infertile patients. Very interesting, because there are 2 things in infertile patients, male patients. One is something that is not here today in discussion, and that is the HPV infection. 37% of not known infertility not recognized infertility in male is due to HPV infection in the semen. And the other one is this one, and that is the fact that sedentary people do have big problems. Now, the same thing as we have seen in the healthy ones was done here, but here it was done mainly in 430 randomized to exercise and non-exercise group. And what really came out was that resistance exercise training improves the markers of male reproduction and reproductive performance through inflammatory and oxidative stress mechanisms in infertile patients. So we have another proof here, and there is another ongoing study which is going to show very soon the same results. Well, the facts in preconception are that we have to remind, I'm sorry, I know that all of you know this, but just we can recall that spermatogenesis lasts 90 days. The oocyte maturation usually is 14 days. And then we have environmental influence upon germ cells, which has been demonstrated, as I showed you, and future parents must start, therefore, preparing for conceptions at least 180 days before. However, since we know very well that you can try to conceive, but maybe it takes 3 years, 5 years, well, you have to behave well for 5 years, okay? The determinants are physical exercise, of course, nutrition, alcohol, smoking, stress, all of that you know very well. So physical exercise in the lifespan usually started with pregnancy. No, now we have to start with preconception. Okay? I think this is important. And then, of course, we have to deal with paternal obesity and undernutrition, because both obesity and overnutrition and undernutrition had the same effect upon the sperm. And so we have not only reduced the sperm motility, increased DNA damage, altered sperm epigenome, RNA, and so on. All of those things that you see there, you find them both in over and undernutrition. And what is interesting is that the DNA methylation changes occurred in genes related to numerous diseases such as schizophrenia and Parkinson's disease. In a few words, we can really impact upon the prevention of neurodegenerative diseases. And on top of that, of all programming of the metabolic diseases. And therefore, cancer, therefore, cardiovascular disease, therefore, diabetes. Well, also with high-fat diet induced obesity and metabolic dysfunction, it was seen very well in mice, this is in mice, that in fact this is going to happen because there are aberrant sperm microRNA and DNA methylation alteration. This has also been seen in humans. What about female, the oocyte? Well, in females, the root of decline in fertility is highly linked to problems in the oocyte. And this problem is correlated with increasing BMI and obesity, of course, but also, once again, in undernutrition. And, well, here we can see what happens really in the oocyte. There is metabolic lipid accumulation. Lipid accumulation is the word, is really what we have to keep in mind. Because when we look at follicles, we look at eggs, at oocytes, we can find at the beginning, I just remind you, when you have the maturation of the oocyte, at the beginning you have the first meiosis, and the first meiosis, at that point, at the beginning of that meiosis, you can see this lipid accumulation, and that is very important because that is the only moment in which, in fact, physical exercise really does something. Undernutrition is the same slide, just to want to show you. This was all on Lancet, published 2 years ago. And, well, if we look at physical exercise and oocytes in mice, as I told you, the German vesicle stage oocyte, that's what I was telling you, especially in mice that had been with a high-fat diet, which corresponded to our obese or overweight women and sedentary women, well, all of them had this problem, and exercise was able to improve but not reverse a damage imparted on all sides as a result of high-fat diet and obesity. What does that translate into humans? It translates in the fact that in the woman, unfortunately, not like in the man, that in only 180 days we can have a reverse, in the woman it takes years. So that's why all of the governments of the world should also think not only about climate, but should also think about movement and about the fact that, in fact, the decline that we have in fertility is due also in good part to oocyte decline because of sedentary habits or because of over or under nutrition. Another important thing is the fact of the mitochondrial metabolic stress. Because, please remember, that all the organs, the mitochondria, for instance, they do come from the female only, never from sperm. And what really happens when you have stress, when you have adverse events, what happens is that these mitochondria may have a damage. And physical exercise represents the most important method in order to improve pregnancy success, thanks to the mitochondria in the woman. So, new discoveries in epigenetics will stimulate a change in the understanding and implementation of knowledge and attitudes regarding conception, pregnancy, child's and adult's health. Because I forgot to tell you everything about pregnancy, of course, and what happens afterwards. That will be in another meeting. But many present beliefs will need to be critically revised with deep social impact. So, parenteral physical activity, our conclusions are that aerobic exercise as the basis of health and wellness, fundamental importance for the mother, the father, and the fetus. Physical exercise of the father, even if he is obese, and of the mother in the preconception period is important for the epigenetic of germ cells, both sperm and oocytes, to prevent metabolic and other chronic diseases in future offspring. This may translate into incredible benefits to society in health, in wellness, and in healthcare sustainability, of course. And finally, sports medicine physicians and professionals should take the lead in the implementation of this frontline primary prevention. Thank you.
Thanks for this presentation. I think that's a message we can take home in every practice, in every hospital. And let me tell you some personal experience. My daughter and my son-in-law are very active up to the marathon, even in the preconception period. And believe it or not, my first grandson is an excellent runner. Okay, we are coming to the next paper. Oh yeah, I see him. It's Simone Porcelli from Italy. And he will tell us about exercise prescription for health for subjects about 65 years, the Italian perspective and preliminary data from the Nestor project. We are very interested to hear this.
Okay, sorry. And then break.
We are good in time.
Yeah.
This.
Okay, thanks for the presentation, and obviously thanks for the organizing committee for inviting me today. We are moving from preconception to the old part, to the last part of the life, so to the old age. But I will try to convince you that also start physical activity in this period is important for health of the single individual. The outline of my presentation will be the following. So I will start to present the importance of exercise also for healthy aging. I will also underline the importance of exercise prescription for health, and I will give you some important notes from the Italian perspective, and then I will present some of the preliminary results that we are collecting in a European project about exercise prescription in older adults. So as we know, the world is getting older, and we know that the number of people over 65 is increasing every year, and this increasing is, the reason of this increasing is significantly different in relation to the type of countries that we are going to consider. If we consider low or middle incomes countries, the reason is mainly due to a reduction of mortality during the childhood, mainly for infection, for example. Whereas if we look on high income countries, usually the reason of this is the reduction of health diseases during the life. And from one perspective, this is obviously a positive thing, because the elderly people has a role in our society. They can help us, they can help in their families, they can help society, they can have relationship with children. So it's obviously a good thing. But this is true only if elderly people are healthy, because if elderly people are not healthy, obviously there can be not useful, and also they can become a problem for the society. For example, in this slide we can see there are medical costs related to chronic disease in US, and we can see that these medical costs are significantly increasing in relation to the increase of number of people over 65. And the reason of this increase are related to these several causes. So the amount of money that needs to be spent to counteract these chronic diseases. And we know from the physiology that during aging occurs several physiological changes. These changes can involve several systems. We know, for example, that there is a reduction of skeletal muscle mass, reduction of strength. We know that there is an impairment of cardiovascular system. We know that there is an impairment of the function of central nervous system. But the problem is that when we move from the physiological condition, which is obviously related to the impairment of several functions like eyeing, memory, processing, and so on, to the insurgence or to the occurrence of very very disease like heart diseases, pulmonary diseases, and others. The most important thing is that these diseases are the burden of older age, and the cause of this are mainly due to the risk factor of this condition. So we know from the literature that if we are able to reduce these risk factors, obviously there is a reduction of mortality in the older age. And this presentation will be mainly focused on the physical activity, but we know that all the other risk factors need to be considered. This is a slide, but we have also seen some slides before, in which there was an evidence of the relationship between the level of physical activity and the risk of mortality. This is in all patients, and these are separated by gender. And we can see that the higher is the amount of physical activity and the higher is the fitness levels, obviously the lower is the risk of mortality. This is another slide that gives you the same message. These data were collected in a huge amount of people, and is published in 2018, so they are very recent data on Lancet, so a significant good journal. And we can see that as much as higher physical activity, the lower is the relative risk for mortality related to cardiovascular disease and to occur with these several other diseases. But what I want to underline this slide is the second part of the table, in which we can see that if these people are not matching the recommendation for physical activity, the risk is significantly higher compared to people that are not following the recommendation. So there are two main points in this slide. The first one is that there is a relationship to the amount of physical activity, but the second one is that if we are not able to match with the physical activity recommendation, the risk is significantly higher. We know that recommendation, and we have seen also the slide before in the first presentation, are mostly the same between adults and older adults, and we know that there is a stress on be active, be less sedentary, and trying to exercise in all the domains, so aerobic, strength, balance, and flexibility. But although we have a lot of publications that underline the importance of physical activity, if we look on the numbers of people that are really matching with the recommendation, these are data from US, and we see that the percentage, which is slightly different between men and women, but is significantly very low. And these data are present also in Europe, so I just underlined some of the countries, and as you can see, there is some variation across the countries, but the percentage are always very low, so significantly lower than 50%. So we are not able to match this physical activity recommendation. And what can be the reason of this inability of match recommendation? And we try to analyze the literature, and we created an Italian perspective of the problem. And in our opinion, there are three main issues that are not considered. The first one is the sedentariness. The second one is the individualization of these guidelines. And the third one is the amount of free living activities. I will try to convince that these three main points are important. When we look at sedentariness, usually it's expressed like involves a little or no movement or the absence of physical activity, when the energy expenditure is very low, and physical activity and this kind of behavior includes watching television, playing video games, and using computer. And if we look on the percentage of people that are sedentariness for more than 7 hours a day, so significantly big part of the day, we see that the percentage is very, very high. So sedentariness is really a problem in our countries. And this is a very interesting slide published on Annals of Internal Medicine. We see they reviewed some of the literature about the effects of physical activity and sedentariness. And if we look on, you look on this summary of the results, moving on the left, you will have a lower risk of health diseases. If you are on the right of this part, you have a higher risk of disease and mortality. So we can see obviously that moving from high to low physical activity, the risk is higher, and we have already underlined this part. But the most important thing is that if we look in both groups and we consider that all people are highly sedentary, even if they are able to perform high intensity exercise or low amount of physical activity, they are always on the right of this graph. So sedentariness has an impact independently of the amount of physical activity that is performed from the subject. And this was already underlined by Italian Federation in a Kongres that was entitled Sedentariness, a New Pathology. So it's really a problem and should be considered aside with the amount of physical activity. This is another concept where the importance of individualization can be underlined. This was a recent paper published on Journal of Physiology, and they recruited a group of people, and they saw the amount of physical activity performed by this subject, and they divided the group in subject exercising 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 times a week. And obviously they measured the effects of exercise training across weeks. If I remember good, it was 8 weeks. And we see that there is sometimes an improvement, but if we look on people that are exercising not so much, the response was significantly lower. And when these people was moved from one to the other, so was forced to increase the amount of physical exercise, they started to respond. So there is no a general amount of physical activity, but we need to individualize the prescription. So what talking from a practical point of view, what is our suggestion? Our suggestion is to consider the amount of physical activity, but also the amount of sedentariness. And so if a subject is really sedentary, we need to increase the amount of physical activity that is required to keep him healthy. Then we need to screen subject, and we need to assess their exercise performance and to understand how to improve this exercise performance. And finally, we also need to take in consideration that people usually do exercise in everyday life. They can go on floors, they can walk for reaching work. So we need to consider also that amount of physical activity. We tried to follow this path of thinking, and we applied this in these European projects, which was funded from EU by Horizon 2020. These are the university and the industrial company that are involved in the project. These projects aim to support the healthy life of older people by independently promoting a customized pathway of well-being. So these were the subdomains considered by the project, so physical activity, nutritional, social, and cognitive. I have no time to underline the importance of the combination of all these domains, and I will focus only on the physical activity, but obviously you can understand that the importance is to combine all these subdomains. The system is based on data collection, and data collection is gathered by different devices. So we have wearable devices, part on environmental sensors, we have device on the bed, we have some sensors for weight balance and so on. All these systems get information and go and send this information to the data collector, and then there is a cloud where these information are elaborated in order to give indication to the subjects. There is the subject can exercise at home and can perform some virtual coaching. So there is a virtual coach that gives feedback to the subject and can also perform some serious games at home in order to be as much as possible close to the usual habits of the subjects. From the physical point of view, we separated, as the guidelines do, the exercise in several subdomains, and for cardiorespiratory fitness, following the guidelines, we separated the exercise in 3 intensity domains, and we matched these in 3 intensity domains with the duration of the single session, and we give this duration a score, and we requested to the subject to reach 30 points per week, so to match the guidelines. What we collected information how the subject can reach the right score. Can reach obviously with structured physical activity, so the system gives to the subject a prescription, or we can reach by free living activity, so walking, running, and so on. What happens for starting the system and how the system monitors the subject? There is a monitoring phase, the first 2 weeks. Then there is an assessment which is related to the individualization of this prescription. Then, according to the results of this assessment, and for example, in the cardiorespiratory system is the 6-minute walking test, which is obviously a test validated. Then we have a separation between subject that has a good fitness, so needs just to retain their fitness, or subject that needs to improve. And then the system every 4 weeks recheck this in order to understand if there is an effectiveness of the intervention or not. These are the references for the 6-minute walking test, which are obviously related to the age of the subjects, with some indication in order to perform. And the subject can perform alone this kind of test, guided by the wearable device. Then the subject can also decide which kind of prescription is the best for him. So can choose how often he would like to train, and at what intensity he would like to train. According to this selection, obviously, he gets a right prescription. And this is an application of the system. We are now starting the pilot, so I cannot show you the results. But in order to understand how the system works, it's 4 minutes of video, so I hope that you can understand. This is the wearable device, and this is typical user. So the system can measure steps and divide these steps in walking and running in order to understand for moderate or light intensity. There is weight, and this collected by the system. There are environmental sensors in order to understand when the subject starts to eat or starts to do something, move from one room to the other. I did not have time to talk about the nutrition, but there is also a system that is able to recognize the food and give the amount of calories, also in relation to macronutrients and micronutrients. And there is also a tangible object that you can see here. This is a prototype, but it's very close to the Google Home that now probably all of you know, and gives feedback continuously to the subject at his home. So the structured activities are already uploaded on the system, so the subject needs to follow the indication of the system. This is one of the evaluation. In order to improve or retain the strength, we measure the strength of the lower limb by this test, which is validated, the 30-second chair rise test. Then all the relatives to the subject are they have beacons, so they can we can measure the social interaction of the subject for the improvement also of these aspects. Then there are also some exercise for cognitive things. Indication about the macronutrients and the needs in relation to what he eats before in the day. And that's all. So thanks for your attention.
Well, congratulations for this excellent study. I think that's a way to do such studies with a multi-center approach.
Thanks.
Congratulations. We now have a 5 minutes break before we continue. So you can get some drink or coffee, but you must be back at 3:00.
naj gre za dolgo ali kratko pot. Zdaj lahko poskrbim za svojo družino, ker moje gorivo poskrbi za moj avto. Izboljšani dodatki v gorivih MOL učinkovito zmanjšujejo obloge in tako čistijo motor. Z novo generacijo goriv MOL Evo poskrbite za motor vašega vozila.
And I have the pleasure to invite Professor Xavier Bigard from France.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like first to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to discuss with you about this topic. As you know, a lot of chronic diseases are associated with a low-grade systemic inflammation. One of the first papers that showed this inflammation during chronic diseases is this one, in which the author studied the expression of TNF-alpha in adipose tissue in an animal model of obesity. And as you see in this slide, in the even lines, 2, 4, 6, 8, there is an increased expression of TNF-alpha in the adipose tissue of these mice. Moreover, the authors injected the soluble form of the TNF receptor that antagonize the biological effect of TNF, and they showed that after injection, the insulin sensitivity increased in these mice after the antagonization of TNF-alpha. So what is the low-grade systemic inflammation? The definition is clear. It's a 2 to 4-fold elevation of circulating levels of pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokines, and the increase of some other proteins like acute fast proteins, and a small increase in neutrophil and natural killers. The low-grade systemic inflammation is associated with an increase of mortality, as you show here, with an increased level of IL-6 in blood and an increased level of C-reactive protein in blood. There is an increase of the mortality associated with these changes in cytokines and inflammatory markers. What is the relationship between the low-grade systemic inflammation and exercise? There is an association between the leisure time physical activity and inflammatory and coagulation markers. Here in this study, the cohort was divided in four fertile, and in sedentary, and when we increase the level of spontaneous activity, there is a decrease of the blood level of C-reactive protein, a decrease of the level of IL-6, and a decrease of the level of TNF-alpha in blood. So with the spontaneous physical activity, there is a decrease of the markers of inflammation in blood. That is also verified if we involve some patients, here patients with breast cancer, in a physical activity program, and we show that with a combination of aerobic or resistant exercise, or with very light exercise like Tai Chi or yoga, there is a decrease of the level, the IL-6 level in blood. We have now three main hypotheses, three main mechanisms at the origin of the anti-inflammatory effects of physical exercise. The first mechanism is this one, is the release of anti-inflammatory cytokines in blood. And this mechanisms goes back to the concept of myokine. This concept has been clearly developed by the Bente Pedersen team some years ago, and they defined the myokines as these humoral factors, peptides, cytokines, and so on, that can have either auto, para, or endocrine effects. These proteins, these peptides, are produced by the muscle itself, and these molecules, these proteins, these peptides can have a lot of effects, including in remote off-guards. And this concept clearly led to the conclusion that muscle is a real secretory organ. But the secretome that is produced at the end of exercise, of muscle contraction, is very complex. We observed several hundreds of peptides and proteins, and we don't know exactly what is the biological activity of the majority of these proteins. But some peptides and proteins are clearly identified, and we improve our knowledge concerning their biological action. And this is the case, for example, for IL-6. And IL-6 is one of the major cytokines that are produced by skeletal muscle during exercise. We have described the response of cytokines in blood after extreme forms of exercise, like this one. And after this kind of exercise, we observed a pro-inflammatory response of cytokines, followed by an anti-inflammatory response with an initial increase of TNF-alpha, IL-1, and a secondary increase in anti-inflammatory cytokines like the soluble receptor of TNF, IL-6RA, the antagonist of the IL-1 receptor, and IL-10. But after a well-tolerated exercise, a moderate exercise and prolonged exercise, we observed only an anti-inflammatory response of these cytokines. And this now is clearly established. And after this type of exercise, we observed only an initial response of IL-6, followed by an increase of TNF-R, the soluble form of the TNF receptor, an increase of the antagonist receptor of IL-1, and an increase of IL-10. IL-6 is produced by skeletal muscle according to the intensity of exercise, according to the exercise duration. And with prolonged exercise, we observed a marked increase of IL-6 in blood. IL-6 is also produced according to the level of glycogen stores in skeletal muscle. If an exercise is performed with a control leg with normal glycogen stores, we observe such increase in IL-6 at the end of exercise, the transcription of the IL-6 gene, and 3 hours after recovery, this one. But if such exercise is performed with a leg in which the glycogen stores have been previously depleted, we increase markedly the level of transcription of the IL-6 gene. So the glycogen stores are also at the origin of the expression of IL-6 in skeletal muscle. But one interesting question is, are myofibers themselves the main source of IL-6 during exercise? In my lab, we try to answer this question, and in an animal model, we isolated pure myofibers, and we controlled that these myofibers were not contaminated by another cells, like endothelial cells, like monocytes, macrophages, and so on. And we tested the expression of IL-6 at the end of a prolonged exercise. And as you show in this histogram, there is an increase of the expression of IL-6 in these pure myofibers. So clearly, it is the myofibers are at the origin of the expression, production, and release of IL-6 in blood. And not all myofibers express IL-6, as you show here. the myofibers that are mainly involved in moderate exercise and prolonged exercise, type 1 and type 2A myofibers produced IL-6 during exercise. And IL-6, it's clearly, in this condition, an anti-inflammatory cytokine. That is demonstrated by this experiment. For example, in this experiment, in rest subjects, in the blue bears, after injection of endotoxin, we observed a marked increase in plasma TNF-alpha. But if this injection of endotoxin is done at the end of a prolonged exercise, in gray bars here, we don't observe such increase in TNF-alpha. And if we inject IL-6 in these voluntary subjects, we don't observe this increase of TNF-alpha. So when we look now at the IL-6 responses in blood, after injection of IL-6, of course, we observe an increase in blood, but after exercise, we observed also an increase in IL-6, and this increase in IL-6 is not observed after rest, during rest, after injection of endotoxin. So that is one of the most evident demonstration of the effects of IL-6 on the decrease of the inflammation. And what are the mechanisms? IL-6 is at the origin of the expression and the production of IL-10. As you show here in this slide, after infusion of IL-6 in voluntary subjects, there is an increase in IL-10, and there is also an increase in the antagonism of the IL-1 receptor, two markers of the anti-inflammatory response. But how to reconcile the pro-inflammatory and the anti-inflammatory of IL-6? That is a problem. The problem is solved by the mechanisms of the signaling. The pro-inflammatory effects of IL-6 are mediated by the binding of the cytokine to the soluble form of the IL-6 receptor, and thereafter the binding to the GP130. But the anti-inflammatory effects are mediated mainly by the binding of IL-6 to the membrane-bound IL-6 receptor and the interaction with GP130. The second mechanism that is at the origin of the anti-inflammatory effects of exercise is the shift in the immune cell profile in the adipose tissue. In normal adipose tissue, there is an infiltration of the M2 macrophage, and when during obesity of overweight, there is also an increase of the infiltration of M1 macrophage. Macrophages M2 are anti-inflammatory, macrophages M1 are pro-inflammatory. And in this experiment, in an animal model of obesity with an high-fat diet, these animals were submitted to exercise in comparison with a normal diet. We had no change in the epididymal fat mass, no effect on the obesity, but as I show here in this slide, there is a decreased expression of TNF-alpha in the adipose tissue in high-fat diet mice submitted to exercise independently of the fat mass. And when we look at two markers of M1 and M2 macrophages, we show also that in these mice, there is a decrease of the marker of the pro-inflammatory macrophages and an increase of the marker of the anti-inflammatory macrophages. The third and the last mechanism that is at the origin of these anti-inflammatory effects of exercise is the reduced expression of toll-like receptors. Toll-like receptors, as you know, are sensitive to antigens, sensitive to heat-shock proteins, and are at the origin of the pro-inflammatory cytokine production in some cells. And as you show in this slide, the acute response to a physical exercise are characterized by a decreased expression of these 4 isoforms of toll-like receptors in skeletal muscle. In another experiment, we show only a decrease of the expression of TLR4, and after physical training, we observed clearly a decrease of the expression of TLR4 in skeletal muscle and in a lot of tissue in the body. This slide only to summarize the mechanisms at the origin of the anti-inflammatory effects with the production of IL-6 by skeletal muscle, the decreased expression of TLR4 in some tissues, and the shift in the macrophages phenotype in adipose tissue. So, in conclusion, I think the time is finished, so you can read the conclusion, and I wish to thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Xavier. And we are coming to the next paper by Elena Vecile. Sorry. And she is give a talk on molecular mechanism of cardiovascular disease prevention by physical activity. And I read with interest, as I have worked with benzaltine and muscle biopsies. You also used muscle biopsies for your studies?
Not muscle biopsies, but culture cell.
Okay, you will tell that. It's a very interesting aspect she will tell us.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. I today want to show you my research based on experimental conduct on in vitro cultural cell. This is specifically. Sorry, I am not. Okay. Physical activity is one of the better prevention of heart disease. Thank you, its anti-inflammatory and immunomodulatory property. It's a known fact that mediator made during physical exercise block the development of cardiovascular disease, such as irisin, adipokine, and myokine, such as interleukin 6 when were produced under sport, and the interleukin 1 receptor antagonist. Cardiovascular disease due to endothelial dysfunction, what is the first step for a heart disease, and this is caused by an altered balance of interleukin 1, potent pro-inflammatory, and interleukin 1 receptor antagonist. But it's important to understand what is interleukin 1 receptor antagonist and how it works. Interleukin 1 receptor antagonist is an inflammatory inhibitor because it competes with interleukin 1 beta for the receptor on the inflammatory cell surface. And then, no signal in pro-inflammatory response. When interleukin 1, we have inflammatory response. But exists another isoform of interleukin 1 receptor antagonist called intercellular interleukin-1 receptor antagonist. And previous study demonstrate their function. Interleukin-1 RA made in the cytoplasm, not secreted, and is a potent inhibitor of caspases. This way, ELRA has a self-protective role against apoptosis. Previous study correlate production of interleukin-1 receptor antagonist in endothelial cell to prevent endothelial dysfunction. Previous hypothesis of interleukin-1 induction by physical exercise. Physical exercise stimulates production of interleukin-6, followed by an increases, repetita iuvant, of interleukin-1 receptor antagonist. So, we always thought that interleukin-1 present in the plasma depends on circulating monocyte secretion. Sports, interleukin-6, blood monocyte, and then production of interleukin-1 receptor antagonist. But cultured monocyte can produce interleukin-1 receptor antagonist under interleukin-6 stimuli, but only if they were primed by growth factor or if the interleukin-6 stimulation is at extremely high concentration that are unrealistic during a physical performance. These are nanograms and under sport, picograms. Okay? During physical performance, do monocytes really make interleukin-1 receptor antagonist? We try to verify what was the source responsible for the interleukin-1 receptor antagonist increase within blood plasma. And if it was only interleukin-6 responsible to their, or there are other molecules that could stimulate interleukin-1 receptor antagonist production. We took human cell that could be involved in production of interleukin-1 receptor antagonist, such as monocyte, endothelial cells, and myocyte. We stimulated them with interleukin-6, obviously, and by other stimuli, such as irisin and lactate. Lactate has been tested at 2 concentrations, 3.6 and 10 millimolar, one under lactated threshold, and the second to mimic high intensity exercise. Monocytes were isolated from peripheral blood of healthy donors by Percol gradient. Endothelial cells were isolated by collagenase digestion of umbilical vein, and muscle fiber were obtained by in vitro differentiation to myoblast. The cells were stimulated over a different period of time. The samples were analyzed with a real-time PCR machine that can evaluate the increase in protein production. The results. Neither irisin nor lactate cause interleukin-1 receptor antagonist synthesis in circulating monocyte.
Professor of Rehabilitation.
In the same way, ELSA didn't not induce increase of interleukin-1 area production. Only LPS, bacterial endotoxin, can cause the synthesis of interleukin-1 receptor antagonist in monocyte. But LPS is in the sepsis, not under physical activity. Instead, in the muscle cell, all stimuli induce production of both isoform interleukin-1 area, secreted and in the cellular. Okay? Secrete form, intercellular form, irisin, lactate, particularly when the concentration is low, 3.5, under threshold of lactate, and EL6. Meanwhile, in endothelial cells, lactate stimulates the production of interleukin-1 area, in particular at high concentration. This one. And intracellular with lactate at 10 millimolar. Instead, interleukin-6 stimulates only the production of EC, interleukin-1 receptor antagonist, not soluble. Perché non va avanti? Our evidence. Irisin, EL6, and lactate, in autocrine way, can induce the muscle during exercise to make anti-inflammatory interleukin-1 receptor antagonist. Lactate, lactic acid, in paracrine or endocrine way, stimulate endothelial cells to production of interleukin-1 receptor antagonist. Conclusion. Blood increase of interleukin-1, I think, not depend to stimulate monocyte, but our result represent the first evidence of lactic acid stimulate endothelial cell production of anti-inflammatory secreted interleukin-1 receptor antagonist. Under physical activity, interleukin-6 and lactic acid induce endothelial cells to produce intercellular interleukin-1 receptor antagonist and is autoprotection of endothelium. Physical exercise, particularly at high grade, appears to a potential atheroprotective mechanism, primarily by causing endothelium self-protection by production of intercellular interleukin-1 receptor antagonist. Our results also represent the first evidence of skeletal muscle production of interleukin-1 receptor antagonist, the most powerful anti-inflammatory cytokine, both in its secreted and intercellular isoform. And then, I think that interleukin-1 receptor antagonist is just another myokine.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. And now we are at the last presentation of our session. I would like to invite Professor Frank Mohr from Germany to give a presentation about immune response to exercise.
Maybe just mention, after this presentation, we have time for general discussion to the auditorium.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to give this talk here about the immune response to exercise. So usually when one is thinking about exercise, most people are thinking about, how is it going?
from the laptop, maybe.
Here, was this pointer?
Ja, es geht nicht weiter, muss man mit.
So, okay, thank you. Okay, so when we are thinking about exercise, most people are thinking about adaptation of the human body, of the heart, of the muscle, or of the vessels. So not so much people are thinking about the immune system. And I would like to tell you now a little bit more about these things and the immune system as a suitable indicator of exercise load and training status. And I would like to do this in 4 short steps, more or less short steps. Structure of the immune system and acute exercise, immune system and chronic exercise. We heard a lot of things about this so far, and immune system and regeneration. So the task to give a talk about immune system and exercise is a little bit difficult one. Why? Okay, because the immune system is a very heterogeneous system, as I showed here on this slide. So we have a number of different organs and we have a number of different cells which are working together to give this immune response, which is again very differentiated. What we are thinking about is a viral defense system or a bacterial defense system and so on. So, and the next part is the immune system is communicating with all the cells of the immune system, but also with the other systems. So, for example, the brain and the muscles, we heard about this, but brain, for example, the depression, which we all have when we are undergoing some flu or something like this. So, and also to other organs, there are many relations between the immune system and these different parts of the body. So, now I come to the point, what do we know about the immune system and the acute exercise? And I want to do this in 3 short steps: the immune cell subpopulations and the functions, the cytokines, and 1 slide about intracellular mediators. So here you can see the reaction of the immune cell subpopulations to a marathon run. So we see here, this is the total number of leukocytes, and we have a sharp increase of leukocytes of more than 10,000 per microliter. Here you can see some other experiments which we performed on the treadmill at intensity of 60% of maximum oxygen uptake, or 80, you see a much lower response. And if we look now on the subpopulations, we can see that we have a divergent behavior of, on the one hand, the granulocytes, which show a strong increase, and on the other side, the lymphocyte population, which shows a short increase, but then a decline under the resting value. So what is the reason for these different changes here? The reasons for the cell count changes are manifold, but two of these I want to explain you more in detail. It's the cell death on the one hand and the cell distribution. So when we investigated the point of cell death, which is initiated during exercise, we made here these observations that lymphocytes death is increased during exercise. The number of lymphocytes which decrease, which die during exercise is not so high. It's only in a minimal percentage, but you can observe it, and it is a point which is dependent on the exercise intensity. That means the higher the intensity, the higher the amount of cells which are dying during apoptosis. On the other hand, it's very interesting to see that this is not happen for granulocytes. They show divergent behavior. You can see here in this slide that the apoptosis of granulocytes is decreasing during acute exercise. I'll come back to this later. But, okay, the lymphocytes, they are decreasing. This is one explanation for the decline of lymphocytes, the transient decline of lymphocytes under the pre-exercise level. But the more important point to explain this decrease of lymphocytes is the change of cell distribution. Here you can see an experiment which we performed obviously only in animals. We injected animals marked cells with a fluorescent dye, and we looked on the distribution of these cells before and after exercise. And here, for example, you can see the spleen. You can here see all these green dots are all single lymphocytes before exercise at rest, and here you can see the same after exercise. And when if we summarize all the different organs which we studied, we can interestingly see that we have here on the one hand, on the right side, we have some organs like the spleen, where the lymphocytes are released from, but we have others like the lung and here the bone marrow, as well as Peyer's plateaus, where the lymphocytes are distributed into. So they invaded these these organs, and this has some reason in which we think, because, for example, such as lung or Peyer's patches, these are surfaces, internal surfaces for the body, where it is needful that lymphocytes are present after such a stressful condition like exercise. Okay, this is the first part, some slides about the behavior of the cells. But what is about the cell function? So this nice figure from David Neiman from the US shows you some interest, or summarizes the results of a number of groups and shows that there is a difference again of the intensity of exercise. So when you show, here you see on this slide some functions, T cell functions, natural killer cell activity or granulocyte, oxidative burst. These are single functions of single cell types. And you can see these are all decreased after a marathon run. So a very exhaustive exercise. So, but if you are doing a perform walking bout, which is much less intensive, you can see increases of these functions. So in this lead to the conclusion that exercise intensity is very important for modulation of immune function, in the way that high intensity of exercise decreases transiently immune function, whereas moderate intensity is able to enhance exercise immune function. But as I showed you on the right side, it's very difficult, because what is the main difficulty in this experiment? We are focusing on one single cell behavior, such as granulocyte oxidative burst. It's just one step of the immune system, but the immune process in defending invading organisms is a very complex process. So it's very hard to judge what is really happening. So if you go then into an animal experiment where you can apply organisms such as viruses or bacteria, you see the results are not so homogeneous. I gave you here one example from animal experiments. Here animals have been infected with viruses, on here with bacteria, and you see a complete different regulation on both systems by the same amount of exercise. In both types, they used moderate exercise, but with different results. So I think here still a lot of work is to do. But the current hypothesis is that the response of the immune system to an exercise load means we have initially during moderate exercise an enhancement of our immune functions, but this goes then into an open window phenomena. That means a transient immunodepression during and after heavy exercise. And this transient immune depression, there are some parameters which are important for this. This is with respect to exercise modalities, for example, duration, intensity, and regeneration time. So the longer a run is, or the higher the intensity, the more expressed is this decrease of this transient immunodepression. On the other hand, there are also other factors such as nutritional status, training status, emotional stress, and sleep deprivation, for example, which are also able to influence this transient immune depression. And I'll show you here one figure which we have drawn to give you an idea how training status is working. So here you can see what is happening with a very untrained person. So after a high intensity of exercise bout, you can see an early depression of immune function, but this is very sharply shifted if you have a high training status, so you need much more of intensity, much more of duration of exercise to induce in a trained athlete here some kind of immunodepression. Another point which I want to mention is nutrition itself. We asked the question, when we were thinking about the mechanisms, how are the effects of exercise now translated into immune function, and we asked the question, what is the role of nutritional status? And we performed one experiment, which I show here just one short result. We performed a very low intensity exercise at 60% of maximum oxygen uptake. This is for 1 hour. This is usually a type of exercise where you see no real immune changes. And this is what we expect and what we can show here, the baseline status for, we have nearly no changes, as you can see here, for this group. This is a group which were non-fasting. And we compared them with the same people which were fasted for 3 days only. Fasting of 3 days and performing the same exercise, low-intensity exercise, were enough to induce changes of annexin-positive cells. And this you can see here. These are the columns for the 3 time points of the group which has fasted for 3 days. So these had now 2 different stimuli, not only the exercise stimuli, but also the fasting stimuli. And what you can see here is that there seems to happen some competition of fuels, because our immune system needs, when it is activated, for example, glucose. And exercise itself is something which activates our immune cells. And this transient activation does not happen so good when we perform exercise during fasting. And this is exactly what then the result is. The immune depression still happens now, also under these conditions of very low and moderate exercise. Okay, there are other links now which I want to show. How is the effect of physical exercise on the immune system? And you can see here the different boxes: hormones, cytokines, oxidative stress, and fuel availability, as I have shown to you. The cytokine pattern has explained just a few minutes ago by one of my colleagues here, so I can go through this. These cytokines are important messengers also for the time after exercise and for the regeneration time. And the question which I want to address as well is it real an open window, a real time of immunodepression? As I told you at the beginning of my talk, we have a divergent behavior between the different immune cell subpopulations after exercise. While lymphocytes on the one hand are dying by apoptosis, we can see on the other hand that the granulocytes are not dying, so their lifetime is increased. That means to us that the activation of the adaptive immune cell during exercise is some kind of an alert reaction and alert situation, while on the other hand, the reaction of the adaptive system or the adaptive branch of the immune system is downregulated. And this is another aspect which we have to consider. Finally, I am coming here to another new cytokine fast ligand, and what I want to describe here with this is always to be aware of the single person, the single reaction of the personal and individual response. This figure shows you the response of fast ligand, an important apoptosis inductor after a marathon run. And what you can see is that you have just a strong increase here after the marathon run, but nothing else is happening then in the later parts. But if we look at different participants of this run, you can see different patterns of this response of fast ligand. This, for example, are the people which ran better than their best marathon time. These were which ran the marathon at immediate intensity, and these performed the marathon at a very low speed. And you can see quite different behavior between these 3 groups. You see here decrease of this fast ligand, of this pro-inflammatory response, while in the other group you can find an increase of the fast ligand. This is another important point which we have to address in the future much more, the individual response of our immune system to definitive exercise loads. The last point in this section is intracellular signaling. When we are thinking how the exercise stimulus is translated into an immune response, we also have carefully considered the intracellular signaling processes. Here on this slide, I just want to remember a little bit about the different intracellular signaling processes. One important, especially in lymphocytes and also in granulocytes, in the immune, that means these immune cells, is intracellular calcium. And here I show you the different calcium patterns after an exhaustive exercise bout. And you can see that we have here, after stimulation with phytohemagglutinin, very different responses of these calcium signals in these cells, which correspond to the different functions which we measure before and after exercise. So that is an interesting point which also deserves further research, because especially the calcium signaling is very sensitive to changes of reactive oxygen species known to induced by exercise. Third point I want to address just shortly, immune system and chronic exercise and training. We had heard a lot about of this two talks before. So I just want to show you two short slides. The anti-inflammatory effects of daily physical activity. You can see here the results of one of the first epidemiological studies by Ford and colleagues. More than 100,000 persons were here divided into 4 groups according to their physical activity pattern. And you see the real association to CRP. So the more active the people were, the lower the CRP level could be measured. We performed this experiment here and asked, what is the ability, the real ability of exercise to change the effectiveness, to change these inflammatory states. And what we performed this study, we used mice and we exposed mice here for 8 months to smoke, like cigarette smoke, for 8 months. And during this model of COPD, so chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, you induce very strong inflammatory conditions in nearly all tissues of the mice. And we have 3 groups. This is the control group, we have the smoke exposure group, and we have another group, the smoke exposure together with exercise. So these mice were also exposed for 8 months to smoke, but during the last 2 months, we put them on a treadmill and performed exercise for 5 days a week, for a total of 2 months. And here you can see the results. You can see definitively how downregulated TNF-alpha is here, for example, in muscle tissue. You see here the surface pattern of different anti-inflammatory molecules such as ICAM1, VCAM1, CD62, important surface molecules for the immune cells to invade inflammatory tissues. And all of them are enhanced and increased during smoke exposure, but downregulated during only 2 months of exercise. And this is a heat map which investigated a number of different inflammatory molecules in the same response. So only 2 months of exercise were able here to change the inflammatory pattern. Final point of my talk, immune system and regeneration. So just a few words to this point, because this now goes in the part of regeneration of body, the regeneration of body after exercise. We know for a long time that stem cells and progenitor cells, here endothelial and hematopoietic progenitor stem cells, are released by exercise stimulus. We could show this in an own study where we used different types of exercise. So continuous exercise, so resistance exercise, but also eccentric exercise, downhill running on a treadmill. And all of these different types of exercise are able to induce regenerative cells like progenitor cells. But there is a difference in their kinetics. You see, for example, here, that the eccentric exercise shows that the colony-forming units are still enhanced 48 hours after exercise. And eccentric exercise is exactly this type of exercise, as all of you know, which produces a high amount of cell, especially muscle damage. And this is now turned into the regenerative process. Mediators for this increase of stem cells and their potential for regeneration are granulocyte colony stimuli forming factor and muscle damage as indicated by CK. So that means the more the damage happened, the more type of stem cells and progenitor cells were released. We performed another experiment in this area because we asked, what I showed you from the beginning of my talk, what is the reason of the dying cells during exercise? And a long time we were thinking that these dying cells, so this is a dead end road during exercise. So the cells are dying, and that it was. And then we thought, now what would be happening if we take these dying cells and inject them into a not exercising animal? And the results you can see here. This is what we performed. We injected apoptotic cells and apoptotic bodies into non-exercising animals. And you can see here the release of hematopoietic and endothelial stem and progenitor cells. And you can see here a dose-dependent relationships. That means the more apoptotic cells we injected, so the more stem and progenitor cells could be released. And this is a very interesting point. That means that we have here a closed cycle. So when we damage our tissues during exercise, either muscle, either lymphocytes, these are well-known signal, obviously, for the body to induce regeneration. And important in this is the point of microvesicles. That is the reason why I have put this figure here, because not only the dying cells are in formation, but also the cell debris, so apoptotic bodies, which are a kind of microparticles. These small membrane-closed vesicles gain now further interest because by this small particles information is given throughout the body, especially for the regeneration process. And this is an exciting and new area which I want to just quickly introduce to you. So I'm now at the end of my talk, and I hope that I could show you some evidence that the immune system is a suitable indicator of exercise load and training status. It is interesting and important because the immune system is a system and it's integrative. So the different players of the immune system, they integrate the different stimulus which are released during exercise. It's sensitive, and also the immune system is trainable. So we can clearly show that with training the immune system can be trained. But still a lot of questions remain, a lot to do for all of us. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Frank. We now have 5 minutes for discussion, general discussion. There are 2 points, inflammatory and physical activity, and the second point could be exercise prescription for health. So ask the speaker you want with a question, if there are any questions left. Yeah, Xavier.
Oh, okay. So I just would like to do a comment concerning the respective roles of sedentary and inactivity on health. We read in some papers, in a lot of papers, that these two factors are independent factors for the chronic diseases. But some recent papers show that there is a clear interaction between physical activity and sedentary. One model mainly in cardiovascular disease suggests that the origin of cardiovascular disease is sedentary. And physical activity could be a modulatory factor of sedentary. This discussion, this comment is supported by the last papers from the Eklund's team, in which the authors in their meta-analysis show that in sedentary people, if physical activity is of high intensity and long duration, but in people who are sitting more than 8 hours per day, there is a stabilization of the global mortality and the cardiovascular mortality. So maybe the deleterious effect of sedentary could be minimized by physical activity. And we are not so sure that these two factors, inactivity and sedentary, are clearly independent.
Well, thank you. Are there any other questions I have to raise? Perhaps I can give an additional comment at the European Society of Cardiology meeting in Paris. There was a very interesting session on inflammatory disease and coronary artery disease. That means the plaque detection and the plaque occurrence in coronary artery disease also depend not only on cholesterol and so on, but also on inflammatory process. I think that's a good link to physical activity, because both are on the way of physical inactivity or activity. But you see, the sedentary time in this session was interrupted by 5 minutes with a boosted effort, and now you are allowed to get some carbohydrates or anything, water, for 10 minutes, or 15 to 20 minutes. Okay.
Naj gre za dolgo ali kratko pot. Zdaj lahko poskrbim za svojo družino, ker moje gorivo poskrbi za moj avto. Izboljšani dodatki v gorivih MOL učinkovito zmanjšujejo obloge in tako čistijo motor. Z novo generacijo goriv MOL Evo poskrbite za motor vašega vozila.
In Italy, and we've got a very interesting session. It's all about exercise, the benefits of exercise in different populations. Unfortunately, I don't think Nada Rotovnik is here, which had an interesting subject on oncology and exercise, but we still have two very, very good lectures on exercise in arterial hypertension and HIIT for cardiac rehabilitation. So I think without any further delay, I would like to invite Anna Heger to give us a talk on exercise and arterial hypertension. Thank you very much. Should we go and sit there?
Dear chairpersons, dear colleagues, I am Anna Heger from Medical University of Łódź in Poland. I am from Department of Sports Medicine, but as well for Cardiac Rehabilitation Center and Outpatient Clinic for Cardiometabolic Disease. And here is my presentation plan. I know that I have a short time, but it is pressure response of cardiovascular system to various kinds of exercise, arterial hypertension in general population and in athletes, benefits of regular physical exercises in prevention and treatment of arterial hypertension, And recommendation of physical activity, currently recommendations for people with arterial hypertension, clinical qualification for physical exercise in people with hypertension, and management of arterial hypertension in athletes. When we talk about arterial hypertension, on the one hand, we know that is the most relevant risk factor of cardiovascular disease worldwide. And on the other hand, arterial hypertension is one of the most common abnormalities identified during a clinical evaluation in athletes. And because people with different physical activity and athletes are engaged in different kinds of exercise, impact of dynamic exercise in physiology is connected with increased in systolic blood pressure to 215 millimeter Hg and diastolic blood pressure up to 115. But when we can and should monitor this systolic blood pressure during dynamic exercise, we can use a regression line. It is correlation between systolic blood pressure and workload. Here are results from our department. It was published in 2016, and it is connected with people, adult people. When we qualified child and teenagers to dynamic exercise, we can monitor this blood pressure according to different relationship between systolic arterial blood pressure and workload. And here is results from second publication, and it is from 2016, over 1,000 people. And when we should remember, when we have people from general population with different level of physical activity and athletes with this hypertension, we should remember that exercise should be interrupted at systolic blood pressure over 215 and the diastolic blood pressure when it's over 115 millimeter Hg. And very important is as well exercise hypotension. And this hypotension during exercise, dynamic exercise, may indicate heart ischemia or left ventricular dysfunction. And the next point, when we have systolic blood pressure during dynamic exercise below 130 millimeter, is bad clinical prognosis for these people forever. And it was dynamic exercise and now static exercise. When we observe people with during static exercise, we should know that systolic blood pressure could be in physiological conditions be above 350, and diastolic could be above 200 millimeter. Also, when we we make classification of arterial blood pressure in athletes and in general population, we have the same borderlines values, and it is 140 millimeter for adult population and 90 for diastolic, pressure for general population and athletes as well. But we very often classified child and teenagers, and then we should use growth charts. And for example, we can use Olaf and Ola Study growth charts. There are from 10 years, not yet. And this arterial hypertension, we can so interpret it. 90 to 95 percentile high normal arterial blood pressure, and we have 95 to 99 significantly high arterial blood pressure, and the last criterion above 99 percentile severe hypertension. And what is with prevalence of arterial hypertension in athletes and in general population? This arterial hypertension in general population with different level of physical activity is relatively big. It is between 30 to 35%. And in people aged over 60 years, it is very often over 60%. But what is prevalence of arterial hypertension in athletes? We have different results, but the last, according to Caselli from 2017, it is 3% athletes in this observation. And there are very interesting results, arterial hypertension in Olympic athletes. It is observation from 2004 to 2014. Antonio Pelliccia is the first author in this observation, and cardiovascular abnormalities in this group was in 4% athletes, and in this group, hypertension was in 11% athletes. And it is our role of doctor of medicine, very important results, impact of regular aerobic exercise on the resting arterial blood pressure reduction. And when we have hypertensive individuals, according good recommendation, aerobic exercise, we should receive very good reduction, about 7 to 3 and 6 to 3 reduction in systolic and diastolic blood pressure. It is connected with aerobic exercise and dynamic exercise, but when we observed resistance exercise on resting arterial blood pressure, we received as well a reduction, but it is not spectacular. It is 2 to 3 millimeter Hg. And what is mechanism of regular physical activity impact on arterial blood pressure reduction? We have many hypotheses, many results, and these results are in this and the next slides. There are different results, but they're all are connected with blood pressure reduction. And now, very useful for our praxis, professional recommendation for people with hypertension. Our recommendation could be described with acronym FIT. We all know about this acronym. It is frequency, intensity, time, and type of exercise. And in my opinion, the most important for our patient, from general population and from athletes, is intensity. When we have patient with hypertension, we should give individual advice, and it is proposal methods to determine the exercise intensity. We could use This formula, it is according Karvonen method. And for example, our patient, according this formula, is we can so calculate 70%, all range between 16 to 18, and multiply heart rate peak minus heart rate at rest and plus heart rate and rest. And it is very practical for our patient because they could monitor his intensity with different device. Different methods are only connected with estimation, and there are not very exactly. But we should pay attention to these devices because we haven't exactly information what is correlation between heart rate monitors and, for example, heart rate from electrocardiogram. There are very rare published article about this topic. And here is results from JAMA from 2016, and the best agreement with electrocardiogram was with Polar H7, Apple Watch, and Fitbit. From Polar, it is from 2016, and we have now H10, but it is any information about this topic. And now, exercise prescription for health, and this part connected with patient with hypertension. And our project in EFSMA, Exercise Prescription for Health, we can, this information we received in our website, and arterial hypertension and particular recommendation are very good described with frequency, intensity, time, type of training, type of sport, and strength training. And it is different recommendation for people with moderate intensity. That is the biggest group. But we have as well recommendation for with vigorous intensity, but it is smaller group. It is connected with group young and adult, middle-aged people with relatively very good health status and very good physical activity. And what should we pay attention? That physical activity for this group can be performed when blood pressure is well controlled. It is very important in practice. When we have pathologic values, it is not good for our recommendation. We have different other recommendation in Europe, and here we have a recommendation from European Society of Cardiology, from Association of Preventive Cardiology, and here the first author in this group of experts is Josef Niebauer, but Michael Papadakis is as well. Congratulations. And we have this position in our Preventive Cardiology journal. And alternative for this recommendation, there are recommendations of physical activity for individuals according to American College of Sports Medicine. It is from 2018. And it is similar recommendation. We have aerobic exercise, resistance exercise, and flexibility. We have frequency, intensity, time, type, but we should say that there are more intensive more intensive as our in European recommendation. And here there are practical restrictions for individuals with arterial hypertension. It is static exercise in physical training, bodybuilding or strength sports in athletes. But the second, reduction or lack of elements of competition. It is very not easy for our athletes, for amateur sports, but we started with this restriction, and very often we can say this restriction. And the next point, avoid exercise connected with severe hypothermia, winter sports, jumping into cold water, and the next, alpine skiing and high altitudes and in very low temperatures. It is in natural condition very often this alpine skiing in high altitudes, but we can start it with very good monitoring these elements. But I have longer time. No? Ah, okay. Moment. And routine workup for evaluation of hypertensive patient. It's similar as in general population. The new one is 11 and 12 point, echocardiography and exercise test for athletes and people from general population with high level of physical activity. Whom no exercise test. No exercise test is only for group with very low physical activity intensity, for example, walking. And what we should done. The athletes, and last parts of slides, the athletes, measurements of hypertension in athletes. And here is eligibility for and disqualification from sports in arterial hypertension. There are recommendations from American societies, and athletes with grade 1 hypertension with no organ damage can practice sport. Athletes with grade 2 hypertension with limiting. And sport with intense strength components should be limited in athletes with grade 2 hypertension and 1st. And lifestyle intervention the same in general population and in athletes, and pharmacological treatment. For athletes, it is very important. Then first line is the first two group: angiotensin convertase inhibitors, sartans, and calcium antagonism. But diuretics and beta blockers should not be first line medication for athletes. And these sartans and angiotensin convertase inhibitors not recommended for women of childbearing potential. And last slide, notes for doctors of medicine taking care of individuals with arterial hypertension. It is medical check-ups are necessary to assess exercise capacity and tolerance. We should assess the effectiveness of risk factors modification, assess disease progress and complication. Recommended physical activity should be adjusted individually. Assessment of pharmacological therapy effects and potential modification of medication doses. And the last point, medical history in athletes should include forbidden exercise capacity enhancement. It is very important in our practice. Thank you very much for attention. But I have information that there are
Don't worry, that was a very comprehensive and excellent talk. Is there one question? Just wait for a second. Is there one question from the audience, or anyone wants to ask anything? No.
I make a question. If you have a patient with borderline or first degree hypertension, how long do you take exercise as the only interventional therapy? For how long before start drugs?
It is different for individuals, but before start the drugs, when we have good physiological value at the rest and good monitoring during, for example, exercise test, it is time to go only with exercise, with only with lifestyle.
How long, how many weeks or months you maintain exercise as the only therapy in these patients? Before you
from
decide
many papers, it is from 3 to 5 weeks from such a people. But I think we should be very conscious for this situation.
Okay, thank you very much. We move to the next presentation. This is Nada Rotovnik. It will speak about the exercise prescription in oncologic patients.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation, and sorry for the delay. I had traffic problems. However, how many of you are medical doctors here? And how many of you are working with cancer patients? Okay, 2, 3 of them. I can speak, but you are not going to see slides. Today, we are treating patients. Today, we are going to personal disease, not just disease, but we have to check each patient personally, especially if this is a cancer patient. Cancer is a huge group of diseases, and if we want to approach physical exercise or physical activity in cancer patients, we have to change our approach. This is not classical medicine anymore. This is multimodal, multi-professional approach. We have to have basic knowledge of exercise, of metabolism. Then we have to translate this in clinical practice. Then we have to evaluate, like we are doing in medical practice, adjust and going this way further. So I would like to point few important things which we have to have in mind when we are speaking about physical activity and cancer patients. At first, we have to forget public health advices for nutrition and physical activity. Okay, we don't forget them totally, but these are politics which enable some to go into clinical perspective to make personalized physical exercise treatment and personalized nutritional treatment. And we are going into clinical physical activity and clinical nutrition, so we have to go into this direction and not to treat patients with public health advices. So basic obstacle, in fact, in practice, I think that you will agree with me, is that the importance in nutrition and physical activity in medicine is still very underestimated. Like this maybe, but the point is more problematic because knowledge is still not properly taken in medical schools. And we think that if we have one day, we can learn everything, but learning about proper physical activity and also proper nutrition, called sport nutrition, for our patients. It's a new challenge for medicine. So we have to have knowledge. I will go fast because I don't have time. Physical activity regulates metabolism and body function. This is obvious. Skeletal muscle is not just muscle, it's an organ with many things which influence metabolism and also oncogenesis, and also what will happen with oncological, with cancer cells in body. So skeletal muscle, it's really important in physical activity and cancer patients, because it has many functions which we underestimate. For example, on immune system, there is a whole new area how physical activity stimulates immune system, and everybody of you is aware how each cancer patient needs immune system to kill cancer cells and to survive. And of course, low muscle mass is connected to many side effects of treatment and also to tumor progression and toxicity. But cancer influences whole body exercise performance. You can see on the first slide, and on the second, you can see that we can go with blue lines. Maybe we can make body better, more functional, and we can influence metabolic changes. We have very good studies even with early stage breast cancer patients. You can see that even muscle mass as a metabolic reserve of cancer patient influence survival. Here is a study on 3,241 women. What is important is that 41% is more likely that women who have low muscle mass will die. And this is early stage breast cancer. This is not metabolically very, very destructive cancer. We did a little check with our students how physical exercise can influence breast cancer treatment when they're getting hormonal therapy, and we found that we can stabilize body mass and composition. And if you look at this paper, I will finish now this knowledge section. There is more than 700 pages paper. You will see that for cancer patient, the best buy is physical activity. You can find many useful information in this paper. But if we would like to exercise cancer patient, we have to know which metabolic disorders are coming with exercise, because exercise is stress. And what is good for cancer patient is metabolic adaptation to this stress. And for this, we have to have knowledge about nutritional support. Because cancer patient is already classified with the metabolic disorders as cachexia and especially sarcopenia, before you see how sarcopenic breast cancer patients have worse prognosis, and we have to understand and tackle these entities and make a nutritional evaluation to each cancer patient, which is going to be who is going to start with physical exercise. This is quite challenging because each of them has its own metabolic, nutritional situation, and we would like to, and if we would like to exercise, we have this black box, and we really have to make nutritional evaluation. I will start with sarcopenia because this is one of the most important points now in this problem. Everybody of you knows that with age we are going to lose muscle mass, functional mass. We are becoming like this, you know, no content anymore, and in this situation, each cancer treatment is less effective. We can treat cancer to some extent, but cancer treatment is today really less effective with this approach. But we don't know what is inside of the patient, so we have to measure patients. And the field of body composition, it's a field which connects clinical nutrition and physical activity in cancer patients. So we have to have at least basic knowledge of body composition measurements. So when we know this, when we have basic knowledge about physiology, metabolic disorders, and we go to implement physical activity in cancer treatment, we have to start with kind of multimodal assessment, kinesiological assessment, nutritional assessment in the same and even before cancer treatment, I would say. So we are training patients at first for treatment, and because treatment is a challenge, and then we also use, I didn't put this on the slide, physical activity with individualized nutrition for regeneration from treatment, and this is now a concept in how to use physical activity in cancer patients. So I will use these concepts from Muscolatori. This is Italian oncologist who proposed that in the same time when we diagnose cancer, we also diagnose nutritional status and also exercise. So, and we are going in this parallel therapeutic pathway through treatment. And after treatment, we use physical activity as rehabilitation, as preventive activity, and also we can use physical activity in palliative care. Already many papers published. But at the end, we always come to translation in your own clinical practice. If you would like to translate this in practice, it's also very challenging. At first, you have to educate, then you have to make courses, then it's good to do some research, at least at local level, and then you can propose some guidelines. We just finished local guidelines at our Institute of Oncology for physical activity for patients with cancer. It's just fresh, 1 week old paper, which I hope we will use in our institution. We made this paper through the project when we try to integrate personalized physical exercise and nutritional strategy during preoperative breast cancer treatment. We are evaluating, still we are at the end of research now, how we can support these patients during preoperative treatment. There is 28 week of their program. And this is basically exercise plan made by kinesiologists, which who adapted endurance type of exercise, power and strength, and also flexibility training, and where it was necessary, also balanced training. I hope I translate this well. So this we did in our clinical practice. I must say it's still a tough thing to implement this in each daily work at Institute of Oncology, but I'm sure that with new knowledge, with education, and with multi-professional approach, we can use this as a very important treatment element of cancer for cancer patients. So, home take messages that we have to know basic knowledge. If you don't understand metabolic issues of cancer metabolism, of effect of treatment, effect of patient's body composition, And if we don't personalize nutrition and physical activity, this is not going to be effective. So we have to take steps to make a change and to go from general nutritional and physical exercise advices to personalized medicine in this field. But this personalized medicine, I think, is also to be the main talk today. Thank you for your attention. I was very fast.
Do you want to stay for a second? Can I ask if Dr. Constantinou is in the room? Okay, just give us a second.
There is? Yeah, okay. Okay. Just a question. What are the contraindications to physical training in a cancer patient?
Oh, we used classical contraindications for oncological patients, which were already published, I think, in JAMA or someone I have in my, they are in manuscript. Are many. Yeah. And this is the point. We have to check each patient. We cannot say to one group of patients, please go and run, please.
The fatigue is not a contraindication, absolute contraindication. The symptoms, fatigue, that is very frequent in the cancer patient.
We would like to cure fatigue.
To counteract,
fatigue is symptom of metabolic crisis, in fact, you know. And so we have to see how we can go with patients. For each of these patients, we have put in the program, we evaluate all symptoms, you know. And I think fatigue is perfect point which we would like to override.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to invite the last speaker, Dr. Dimitri Constantinou from Johannesburg in South Africa, who will talk to us about high-intensity interval training for cardiac rehabilitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizing committee for the invitation. I know we're running short of time, so I will try and be brief. This is an interesting topic in terms of high-intensity interval training for cardiac rehabilitation. And if one looks at the evidence that is out there, I'm going to present some of that for you. The American College of Sports Medicine guidelines talk about cardiac rehabilitation involving large muscle groups with rhythmical movement and activity, and they give some description of what kind of activity one can do. And this should be done at least 3 times a week, preferably most days of the week. Other researchers have proposed at least 5 days a week for cardiac rehabilitation. And the intensity can vary depending on individual patients, between 40 and 80% of heart rate reserve or using RPEs and so on. And also the duration can vary between 20 and 60 minutes per session. I think it's acceptable to say that regular physical activity for cardiac rehabilitation is well established, and there are guidelines available for that. Participation, however, if you look at the data around that, is very poor, and the uptake and the participants staying on programs is very low. And in fact, only up to 30% of all eligible patients do take up the programs of cardiac rehabilitation. And further to that, compliance actually gets less over time. So despite the evidence, despite efforts by many centers and clinicians, the uptake is quite low. And this has relevance in what I'm going to be talking about in terms of possibly where high-intensity interval training may have a role to play. So high-intensity interval training for cardiac rehabilitation, essentially we're talking about a specific exercise mode which involves high intensity, as it states, and it's at various intervals. So this particular kind of exercise mode has been looked at for cardiac patients for a number of reasons. Obviously, the outcome measures being specifically to see if they do have any benefits for cardiac patients. So what is high-intensity interval training? As the name suggests, it's fast, intense bursts of exercise, which is then followed by brief intervals with much lesser intensity. But this can vary, and people often confuse the detail around this, and I'll give you some examples in the next slide. So the variations may exist within the intensity itself, and the less intensity activities may even be total rest. So you have high intervals of exercise participation, and then there's a period of rest or less intensity. And the variations can be in the intensity, in the time, the type of activity, obviously, and these can all contribute to the concept of HIIT. So if you look at some examples, you may have something where you have a 15:45, which is 15 seconds of a sprint or intense activity, and then a 45-second rest period, and then that is repeated. You may have something like 30:90, which is 30 and 90 seconds respectively, or 30:30, and this can vary, obviously. So when you read about high-intensity interval training, you've got to look at what the program itself was actually doing, because it may vary. And each should be performed with repetitions which vary between 6 and 8, and the ideal length of the total activity would be about 10 or 16 minutes. So the relevance of that is that when you look at uptake and participation, perhaps if you've got an activity that is only 10 minutes long or 15 minutes long, and it's got very short episodes of intense activity, that people may participate more frequently. And this can be done around 3 to 5 times a week or so. Just to mention, we have a PhD student at the moment who's doing a variation of this, and he's literally only doing 30 seconds of all-out maximal intensity exercise 3 times a week. That's all it is. And measuring participation and also changes in cardiometabolic markers. So we'll see how that turns out. So the idea of the benefits of this program is that you will increase aerobic fitness, you can increase anaerobic fitness, muscle strength and endurance, possibly remove some of those barriers to physical activity we mentioned in terms of time commitment. It's something that is not usually quite boring, and it's something that can be self-regulated, and perhaps therefore adherence may increase. And of course there are the general physical activity benefits that one can get from all the above aerobic and anaerobic fitness parameters. Of course, as with any activity, with the benefits, there may be some drawbacks. So what are the limitations? Some of the ones that have been highlighted in the literature are resources. So it's not a huge barrier, because you don't always need very intense, expensive or space-occupying equipment. The second one is quite an important one, and that's fear. And I've put in brackets, I think, ignorance more than anything, because people are fearful of participating due to not understanding and knowing the activity and the benefits potentially. And of course, the inability to perform this kind of activity. So anyone who has any musculoskeletal disorder or other reason for not being able to participate in this activity is obviously going to have a limitation. So I've just mentioned a study there that was done 18 months or so ago, where they looked at, pardon me, staff knowledge, healthcare professionals, and the understanding was that the lack of resources and staff knowledge were perceived as the biggest barriers to high-intensity interval training in implementing those programs, and inconsistent perceptions of pre-screening and monitoring requirements. So there are a number of aspects. One is not understanding and appreciating what the exercise activity is, not having the resources, but then how do you monitor and manage these? It's very easy, relatively speaking, when you have moderate intensity continuous exercise. You do a baseline measure, you can look at heart rate, blood pressure, RPE over a period of time with a steady state or slow increase in intensity. Whereas with this kind of activity, One of the problems is that people are not aware of how do you manage it and how do you monitor this. So those are the things that one would obviously have to try and correct. So I think a big factor is ignorance or lack of knowledge. So if you don't educate people with this activity, then obviously they're less likely to participate. And I think that's an important take-home message. So in terms of what cardiac conditions is it applicable to, and essentially it could be any cardiac condition. It can be related to those who have cardiac risk factors. It may be post-myocardial infarction. It can be in patients with heart failure and a number of other cardiac conditions. So it's not restricted to any one aspect of cardiac disease. So just a couple of examples in terms of the risk factors. Yes, there are benefits. VO2 peak, insulin sensitivity, HDL levels have all been shown to improve with high-intensity training. And this study from 2012, which looked at cardiac rehab benefits versus moderate intermittent continuous exercise, essentially showed that it was relatively safe and effective, but they recommended it as an alternative mode of exercise, which opened up the field to people participating quite extensively. This study from this year, in fact, looked at the training in patients with coronary artery disease and found that there was evidence again that it could be used as an alternative to the traditional form of moderate intermittent continuous training, but that it's not fully substantiated in the literature, and obviously more research needs to be done. This particular study also looked at moderate intensity versus high intensity training, and it said that only after patients exhibit stable and asymptomatic responses to vigorous exercise training should they participate. And in fact, their findings were that the compliance actually also drops after a period of time in unsupervised exercise. So it is something that should be supervised, and therefore it is not superior to traditional cardiac rehabilitation programs. Again, a study that was done very recently in this year, where it was recognized that it is being used across the world, but there are no universal criteria. There are still safety concerns, and they propose that the monitoring framework should be heart rate target zones. So if you look at the risks related to high-intensity training, this was a systematic review, and they found that it has relatively low rate of major adverse effects in typical cardiac rehab settings. So just to mention a couple of specific conditions. So in heart failure, there is evidence that it can assist, but it may not be necessarily any better than moderate intensity continuous training, in particular left ventricular remodeling or aerobic capacity. A study which looked at advanced cardiac failure using a specific program showed that there was improvement in skeletal muscle power amongst in-hospital, so phase 1 rehabilitation program with those with advanced heart failure. Similar study looked at heart failure also and said that this was something that could complement the traditional cardiac rehab programs rather than replacing them. So we have some evidence for alternate and some for adjuvant treatment. With ischemic heart disease, there is improvement in VO2 peak and in metabolic equivalence at ventilatory thresholds, and this was shown to be a little bit superior to other forms of continuous training. And so on. There are other evidences in post-myocardial infarction. There were changes with improved heart function, reduced infarct size, antioxidant systems. So the benefits were all along the range from the cellular level to the macroscopic myocardial level. In heart transplant patients, you would think that maybe there would be some resistance to that, but it has been studied, and there have been quite a few papers on looking at heart transplant and in high-intensity training. This particular one looked at an 8 to 12-week intervention, and there were significant improvements in outcome measures of VO2 peak, heart rate, and peak blood pressure. And this was a systematic review. And there are a number of studies that have actually looked at heart transplants, and in fact, most show that there are benefits from high-intensity intermittent training. We know that cardiorespiratory fitness is an important parameter for cardiovascular mortality, other than looking at specific cardiac rehab programs as such, is there a measure of improved fitness that high-intensity training presents? And the answer is yes, it does. So this particular study looked at cardiac rehab settings with high-intensity training and found that there were greater improvements in peak exercise capacity and in submaximal exercises. So all participants would benefit from this particular program. And so there are lots of other evidence looking at a number of things, and I've been told my time is up, so I'd like to just end off with a little bit of a devil's advocate story, that this particular study from January this year said that the current review highlights numerous specific research directives that are needed before the safety and effectiveness of high-intensity training can be confirmed and widely adopted in patients, in cardiac patients essentially, especially in unsupervised non-medical settings. So there is lots of work still to be done, and I could say that I think there is value and there is a role to play in cardiac rehabilitation, but like everything else, it's got to be better understood. More research needs to be done. It should probably be supervised and well motivated. Maybe should be used as an alternative or as an adjunct, and there is space for more research. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience?
Yes.
Just the microphone,
please. Slides, there was a mixing between heat and seat, the superior, and the sprint interval training.
Yes.
So this is a different type of exercising. What we talk about heat is not reaching the 100%. It's close to the 100%, not reaching or passing the 100% of the capacity. It's a sprint interval, a different type of, I don't think we use it in cardiac rehab, but heat, we do use it, and you said right, it's another way to deal with patients, especially improving the adherence of the patient.
Thank you for that comment, yes.
Maybe just a brief question. In your experience, you know that cardiovascular patients are older, not always, but many times, have a lot of comorbidity. How many, in your idea, is the percentage of patients that are able to perform high-intensity interval training? And the other question is about the risk of traumatic injuries, about this.
Yeah. Good questions, and I find, in our experience, we find that the majority of patients, in excess of 80%, can actually participate in this, because the high intensity is whatever they are able to do maximally. So if they can only get their heart rate up by a certain percentage, or the RPE up to a certain percentage, it's relative to their ability, and with time that improves. So if you do very short bouts, and I find that the patients actually enjoy it. They feel that they're achieving something quite good when they're pushing as hard as they can.
It's less boring than
Exactly.
And what kind of examination you perform before start this type of training?
It's the routine cardiac examination. So we make sure that they don't have any underlying ischemia, that we do a stress ECG. Yes, the energy shot, yeah. So,
okay. I think that will end the session. Thank you very much.
Naj gre za dolgo ali kratko pot. Zdaj lahko poskrbim za svojo družino, ker moje gorivo poskrbi za moj avto. Izboljšani dodatki v gorivih MOL učinkovito zmanjšujejo obloge in tako čistijo motor. Z novo generacijo goriv MOL Evo poskrbite za motor vašega vozila.
And I am Anna Jäger, my German is Ron Golan from Israel. And we have 1 hour and 3 presentations. And the first, please, Matej Tusak from Slovenia, how to get start moving and how to keep the motivation for moving is... Fabio Pigozzi is not here as well.
Ask for the next one. If not, yeah.
Fabio Pigozzi is not here. And Matej Tusak from Slovenia. The biggest way from...
How to get moving. He's not moving here, so we'll move forward, I guess. We'll go to the next one.
Next one is this
Fabio
presentation
Pigozzi,
from
but
Fabio Pigozzi, but Fabio Pigozzi is not with us in different room.
Andre here? Andre de Bruin?
No. His presentation... Okay. Herbert. Andre de Bruin is withdraw, connected with airplane. And we have Herbert Löllgren with this presentation. Yes, Herbert? It is presentation from Andre de Bruin, but with problem with fly. It's not with us.
Good. He's here.
Here. Not.
Did you ask outside?
Yes, Tushak is not here.
He's not going to be here?
No.
Okay. The last presentation.
This?
De Bruyne.
Okay.
Somebody's supposed to talk about motivation. He's not here to be motivating people.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Close the door. Yeah. So I apologize. I take over the presentation by Andre de Bruyne, who is a victim of the... well, Andre de Bruyne is not coming here because he's a victim of the bankrupt of the Adria Airways, and he didn't get another ticket in time, so he asked me to present his slides. It's a good part of the first session we had on exercise prescription for health, but he starts this from the other side, not from the physical activity, but from the sitting time. This is Andre de Bruyne, so to see, or for you, who is it? This is Andre de Bruyne. Unfortunately, he's the first time not at an EFSMA Congress, so he regrets it. This is a poster we had at the HEPA Congress. HEPA was in Odense some weeks ago. It's a part of the WHO and especially engaged in physical activity, health-enhancing physical activity. And they wrote it, okay, they wrote it with the bicycle and with the inactivity and some aspects. This is only a poster you can use in your institute, in the hospital, or anywhere else, and explain everybody what is happening. And what is known that we heard this in the morning, that exercise or the non-exercise or the sitting is really an enlarging risk factor. There are many meta-analyses that sitting more than 4 hours a day, even TV showing and looking at, etc., increases the risk, and the actual recommendation is underbreak your sitting time every hour for some minutes and then continue. But we come back to that. These are the numbers of people in Europe which are at least one active in a week. These are the males, and females are less active, and 59% of all European people are even less active, as you can see here. 39% have an increasing inactivity, and 48% do any form of physical activity, either cycling, dancing, or anything else, but only once a week. Men are more active than women, and what is not shown here, with increasing age, the inactivity and the sitting time of all peoples decreases enormously. This is the circulus vicious of the inactivity. You can see increasing age, decreased activity, overweight, decreased physical activity, more overfeeding, compensating frustration, overweight, reduced activity, and so on. And this is the circulus vicious and increases with age. And this is really a goal. We should underbreak such vicious decrease. This is an overview from WHO on the insufficiency activity in men all over the world, and you can see there are the third-party countries are more active than the parties with a very high low income. This is always in most active countries. This is also for men and for women. What WHO asks for in this year is more active people for a healthier world. That means especially the young and the older one should be more active than they are at the moment. These are recommendations from HEPA last month. Create active society, create active environments, create active people, and create active system. And we have a trend in the world that population-based interventions are very, very important. Population-based interventions means roads very safe for foot passers, for cyclists, and so on. And there's one example, in my opinion, the best in the world. It is Copenhagen. They have separated ways for the cyclists, and you can see so many people using a cycle in Copenhagen as never before, also not in Amsterdam. This is only due to interventions on a population basis. The next population intervention is to create an environment for activity. Environment for activity means you need a park, you need parks for children, you need parks for families, for young women, for women with young girls and so young children and so on. And there are many, many cities in the world where such environments are not given. And the second is that the environments should be free from particulate matters, because this is, according to the recent status, a high risk for cardiovascular and lung diseases. Create active people, is that what we try to do with the exercise prescription for health? That means every doctor at each contact with each patient or each person should ask for his physical activity. That doesn't mind if that is a sports physician, even ophthalmologist or psychiatrist and so on. In each contact with each patient, they should ask for physical activity, and this should be taken to the protocol of the patient. The Americans and even the European physicians call this is the fifth vital sign. That means vital sign is, do you bioactive regularly or do you intensive sports? So changes of lifestyle will help. Changes of lifestyle, as we can calculate, contributes to 50% to your health. 15% of your health lies in your own responsibility. About 10 to 15% depends on the genes, and the difference depends on the environment. Environment means particulate matter, the gases from auto cars, but also environment, as I told you, the parks and the medical environment. That means a nearby physician practice or even a hospital. But 50% of your health depends on your self-responsibility on 4 factors. This is non-smoking, this is normal weight, normal body weight, or with circumferences. The third is healthy diet, Mediterranean diet, and the most important is regular physical activity, and as we heard before, moderate activity, walking and dancing and so on is sufficient. Well, we can skip that. This is a summary again from pre-participation screening for healthy athletes, and EFSMA has identified 4 E pillars for exercise prescription for health. Pillar 1, this is from Joe Kaminski, epidemiology and education. This is one task for all physicians, especially for the GP. The second will be economic factors, consultation according to the recommendations from EAPA, WHO and other bodies. And the third pillar is efforts of central bodies to get the population mobile to date. And this is not only a goal of healthy lifestyle, but as we have discussed the last weeks and months, it also contributes to a healthy climate or to improve our climate changes if we use more active ways for shopping, for going to school and so on. And there is a very nice project in the United States. You know, everybody or all children, school children will be brought by car to the school. And in USA, they have a model. They collect all the children 4 kilometers before the school. And there is a older man or women, retired, and they go to foot this 4 kilometers to the school. And what we know is that these children, being more active, have better results in the school, even in mathematics and other chapters. So this will help everybody if we continue to have our children active. And the 4th pillar is what we have heard before, the exercise deficiency syndrome. That means the sedentary lifestyle, physical inactivity, sitting time and screen time together. Childhood obesity is another factor which depends, in my opinion, also on insufficient activity. And in Germany, there is a claim that all school children in every class should have 1 hour sports a day. They don't, the teachers, they don't like that, but it's the best you can do. And we have a large study in a large school in Leipzig. All children having 1 hour physical activity per day had better results in their school. Well, prescription for exercise, I showed it before. This is what every doctor should have on his desk and fill out. Even if the patient is healthy, he also gets all these informations, what he should do with intensity, duration, and so on. The fit definition is just here brought. You know that from many presentations today, frequency, intensity, time, and everything results in these general recommendations if you haven't a better individual recommendation. You have seen this. These are, for example, recommendations for people with diabetes. And I was at a large meeting in the American Heart Association some years ago, and there was a statement: if you treat a patient with new diabetes mellitus, not in first line with physical activity, that is a wrong treatment. You have to start any treatment in diabetes with physical activity first, and then think of drugs or insulin. We heard also about some coaching of physical activity. There's another large company all over Europe, the Virtua Gym, and they give you individual informations about your about the app on your mobile phone or even by TV, how to perform a training at home. And you can contact your doctor, or he can contact the company Virtua Gym for recommendation for giving such a program to their patients. The next is, we also heard of that the wearable technology is immensely increased in the last year, and the health can be analyzed with such wearables in an unbelievable matter. I only mentioned there is a company from Japan offering a T-shirt for Holter monitoring. Very, very exactly. So can use it as a Holter monitoring system, ECG recordings, and so on. A progress tracker is also available. You can see that with all many parameters to register. And Virtua company also considers these factors for recommendations of physical activity. This is an example. If you have Virtua Gym, you can see this in a small picture and can perform activity. You can get a feedback to the company. There are many apps for recommendation. Okay, we are coming to the end. You see, this is the coaching system of Virtua Gym. They have thousands of patients and healthy subjects performing exercise testing at home according to their recommendations and their pictures. And also they offer a nutritional plan. We heard of the large importance of good nutrition. Well, what do clinicians need? We don't have yet an international code for exercise deficiency syndrome as a disease. This is just, we tried that to get this, but it's not finished. We need a better education of medical students, especially in Germany. In Germany, the program for medical students does not contain any chapter for physical activity for sports medicine, nothing. So they are doctors in the hospital and don't know what is sports medicine or physical activity unless they are active themselves. We need a consensus agreement on testing and follow-up. This is what EFSMA is also preparing, and have the exercise prescription for health as an individualized prescription and promoting physical health. Well, this was a picture I showed you before. This is the exercise deficiency syndrome. To the left, the increased risk with inactivity or sitting time. On the right side, the decreased risk of physical activity, even in a moderate time. Well, there are many posters, and I only would recommend you to read the British Journal of Sports Medicine. They publish such posters in mostly one graphic. Infographics, yes, that's a terminal. And this is quite helpful for wherever you are working in a company or or in a school or in your practice. So this is the end, and this is how the presidents of EFSMA show their activity. This is André, past president, this is Norbert Bachel, past president, and this is Joe, who died some months ago, but they returned from the Congress office in, it was in Strasbourg, to the hotel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Herbert. The discussion will be after the second presentation. And now it is for me honor and pleasure to introduce our world president of International Federation of Sports Medicine, Professor Fabio Pigozzi. Please, Fabio, with your presentation. And it is topic, the prescription of physical exercise in prevention and treatment of disease. Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the chair of this session, Professor Anna Jäger. Anna, my very old friend and vice president of the European Federation of Sport Medicine Association. I would like also to thank my great friend and not so old friend, because we know each other since last year, but by the president of the Slovenian Federation of Sport Medicine, Petra Zupet, who is also Secretary General of the European Federation, and she did a great job in organizing this Congress, where also the International Federation of Sport Medicine have been hosted for its executive. So I am very happy. I'm very happy to be here. It's not the first time, because Portorož is beautiful, and thanks to the world of sport medicine, I discovered that the weather is getting better today in comparison with this morning raining and showers. So I really hope to enjoy the next 2 days here in this beautiful country, in this beautiful city. So the topic of my lecture is, as you know, a very hot topic in sports medicine and in sports science, the prescription of physical exercise in prevention and treatment of disease. It's really an hot topic, and I would like to stress the fact that in the so-called civilized countries, we have a big problem of the non-communicable disease. We have to take into consideration, dear colleagues, that chronic pathologies kill 41 million people each year. So this means 71% of all deaths globally. But this is even worse in the so-called, as I said, civilized country, more rich country. In my country, Italy, we have more than 90% of all deaths due to non-communicable disease. As you know, communicable diseases are represented mostly by cardiovascular disease, cancer, and then respiratory disease, diabetes, and others. Which are the risk factors for non-communicable disease? All of us is aware that the tobacco is very dangerous, the harmful use of alcohol, and also the unhealthy eating. But last but not least, the physical inactivity. Physical inactivity is a huge risk factor for non-communicable disease. This is very well known from a scientific point of view, and for this reason, the WHO launched a global plan in 2013, a global action plan with the goal to reduce physical inactivity. How? Through educational, environmental, and motivational programs to support the lifestyle changes, and in particular, the physical inactivity. We have to take into consideration that we have scientific data since many decades that physical activity, if regular, is a very well-known protective factor for prevention and treatment of leading non-communicable disease, starting from the heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and also cancer. Not all the types of cancer, but some types of cancer have a very dramatic support from physical inactivity in showing up. And we have also to take into consideration that physical activity is also very helpful in counteracting hypertension, overweight, and obesity. So we have to involve the main stakeholders. This is the aim and goal. So it's really important that not only we as a sport physician, but also sport scientists and other allied professionals are really aware of the risk of this lifestyle. We all know that we started to scientifically focus on the risk of physical inactivity many decades ago. But I would like to stress that an important milestone have been represented by the study from Booth, a US physiologist, who introduced about 20 years ago the concept of sedentary death syndromes. Sedentary death syndromes means disorders related to sedentary lifestyle determining an increase in mortality. These disorders are represented by muscle weakness, low bone density, hyperglycemia, glycosuria, low HDL levels, obesity, and of course reduced physical resistance and resting tachycardia. We have scientific data which report that we have many clinical conditions caused or worsened by a sedentary lifestyle. And this has been reported in his famous article by Booth. First of all, of course, cardiovascular disease are caused or worsened by sedentary lifestyle. But as you can see in the list, I will not read all the list, but we have clearly not only cardiovascular disease, but also metabolic disease like type 2 diabetes or hypercholesteremia or triglyceridemia, obesity, and also some forms of cancer like breast cancer, colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, and prostate cancer, where is demonstrated a relationship with a sedentary lifestyle as a risk factor. I would like also to stress that we have many data, scientific data reporting that there is a relationship between sedentary behavior and cardiovascular risk. We have to stress the fact that it's not only important to train. All of us is convinced maybe that it's important to focus on having during the day 1 hour, 45 minutes of training. It's not enough. It's not enough because we have also to think on replacing sedentary times with other activities. This is the reason why I would like to congratulate the organizers of this Congress, where it has been found during the presentation 3 or 5 minutes every couple of hours, where all the participants have been called to make a sort of physical exercise. It's really important. It's not only important to train 1 hour per day when for 9 hours we sit in front of a computer. We have to find spaces to replace physical inactivity. Also in the organization of our lifestyle, such as walking instead of taking the car, or maybe to jump out of the bus not very close to the place where we work in order to obtain a decrease of the physical inactivity during the day. This is a study which I believe most of you know, that shows that replacing sedentary time with physical activity is really important to improve the protection to risk, to cardiovascular risk. In fact, the authors reported that replacing 30 minutes per day of sedentary time with high intensity physical activity was associated with significant reduction in all-cause mortality risk. So, replacing 10 minutes of sedentary time with moderate physical activity was associated with reduction in cardiovascular mortality risk. This is important to report, but it's also important to report that no statistically significant reduction were found with respect to cancer mortality. So, physical exercise is very important for primary prevention, and physical exercise allows also to switch from treatment to prevention. We have data, important data, related to the health care cost, that an active person is less costly than an inactive person. But sadly, I would have to say that in the health programs in most of the countries, is not provided physical activity. And this is very sad, because social costs are dramatically decreased through physical activity program. We have, dear colleagues, not only to be concentrated to live longer, but the quality of life until the last day of our life. And this is strictly related to the healthcare cost as an issue. I would like also to report that all the relevant bodies concerned, starting from the United Nations, now are really committed to promote physical exercise as primary prevention. In this slide, I show the president of the European Federation of Sport Medicine Association, who is Maurizio Casasco, who is here, not here in this room because he had another meeting now, but he was last year in September in the United Nations headquarters, where it was launched a program to counteract non-communicable disease, and in particular, he stressed the importance of physical activity to counteract the primary cause of non-communicable disease, which, as you are aware, is inflammation. I would like also to say and to stress that physical activity reduces most of the causes of morbidity and mortality in the world for non-communicable disease. And we have consequently very many benefits for people who have a risk factor, because we can, through the physical activity, through a regular physical exercise, to counteract the vicious circle which is determining most of the pathologies. Regular physical exercise, and who is engaged with sport physiology, sport science, and sport medicine know this very well, lead to a decrease of cholesterol and triglycerides, lead to a decrease of platelets aggregation, better function of vascular endothelium, decrease the blood pressure, decrease the sympathetic activity, and better metabolic regulations, and a decrease of the obesity and the blood glucose level. So at the end, it can counteract very many risk factors. We have scientific data related to an important relationship between physical activity and ischemic stroke. Physical activity leads to a decrease of the incidence of ischemic stroke, as well of diabetes, as well as breast cancer. This is what we know from science, and this is what we would have to promote through program of promoting physical activity. And also colon cancer is unfortunately affected by physical inactivity. All scientific data are already available. And I would like also to stress that there is a scientific evidence which is accumulated on physical activity as means for the primary prevention of cancer. Nearly about 200 observational epidemiological studies of physical activity and cancer risk at a number of specific cancer sites have been conducted. So we can say that based on the scientific evidence, some public health organizations have issued physical activity guidelines for cancer prevention, recommending at least 30 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity. This is really important, how much we can achieve just through 30 minutes of physical activity. I would like also to stress that we have also continuous curves, risk curves for association between physical activity with breast cancer, as I said, colon cancer, diabetes, ischemic heart disease, and ischemic stroke. So, in conclusion, all these very important pathologies from an epidemiological point of view are counteracted by physical activity. I stress the importance also of the quality of life until we live. So it's really important, the importance, to promote the importance of physical activity in the elderly people. We have to take into consideration that is existing and very well known since many, many years, a vicious circle of physical inactivity. When we have a decrease of functional capacity, which is influenced by sedentary lifestyle, which leads to an increase of morbidity, we have, of course, a situation where the physical deterioration due to increased age, lead to decreased physical inactivity, decreased physical ability, feeling old, less activity, and greater decline in physical activity. So it's really important to maintain the functional capacity when aging through a regular program of physical activity. What is the outcome of physical inactivity in elderly? We know very well a reduction of bone density, loss of muscle, loss of strength, and major risk also in very simple activities, because in elderly people any stupid fall could lead to big damage. We have also to consider that physical activity is also very helpful to maintain and to promote brain health in aging. We know that exercising at least 52 hours was associated in this important review with improved cognitive performance in older adults with and without cognitive impairment. The exercise modules have been addressed to aerobic, resistance training, mind-body exercise, of a combination of this intervention. And of course, it's really important to include in this strategy, and more in elderly people who have, of course, in most of the cases already some pathologies, to take into consideration that the utilization of physical exercise as a secondary prevention is really crucial. The concept of exercise therapy is a concept which now is globally well known, but we as a sport physician, we started really many years ago to try to find also through physical exercise a support of the therapy of the most common pathologies, for example, starting from hypertension. We have to take into consideration that in many pathologies the exercise therapy lead to a better control of many pathological events. And as I said before, not only improves the quality of life, but decrease the social cost of many pathologies. And I come back to the aim of my presentation, to give data on the prevention of non-communicable disease. Physical exercise has to be integrated also in programs, in national programs for secondary prevention. This is because exercise training has been increasingly utilized in the treatment of chronic disease and appears to be a safe way to improve physical performance and functional capacity and reduce disability. We have many programs which have been launched in the last decades, programs in the United States like Exercise is Medicine, programs like exercise prescription for health here in our continent, Europe, and other major organizations are promoting physical activity both for primary and secondary prevention. But it's really important to speak a common language, so to have, I would say, a global alliance between the most important and relevant stakeholders. I just want to show you a slide where you can see in a very fast way how many pathologies can be treated through exercise. And of course, we know since many, many years that even if we have sometimes subjects who can consider no responders, we can treat easily hypertension, low hypertension with exercise therapy programs, ischemic heart disease, heart failure, and also respiratory disease, metabolic disease, and as I said, I don't want to repeat neoplastic disease. I would like to say also that, for example, actually also for skeletal muscle disease, we utilize physical exercise. I remember when I was a student and when I was a young physician, for example, when we had a rheumatic disease in an acute status, we prohibited physical exercise. Now, the approach is totally different because it has been discovered through several studies that you decrease through physical inactivity the cardiovascular function, and this lead to the worsening of many physiological capabilities. So actually, only in the very short time of the so-called evolutive poussée, we stop those who have rheumatic disease and rheumatoid arthritis. This is a change. And how is possible to change? It's possible to change between when you communicate, when you have bridges. And we, as a sport physician, we usually have everyday relationship with other colleagues from different specializations, because we have to deal, when we talk, for example, about and we discuss about sport eligibility, we have to discuss with the different specialists who are involved in the evaluation. So sports medicine is a multidisciplinary area, and for this reason, having relationship with the different society change the approach of this society to several diseases. Now also the rheumatologists do not forbid the physical exercise during rheumatic diseases. I would like also to stress that lifestyle modification in secondary prevention is very helpful to be lifelong. This is also important because we have to take into consideration that the beneficial effects of exercise training are reported in patients with cardiovascular disease, independent of age and disease recording. We, at a molecular level, we can see several organs ranging from the cardiovascular system to the skeletal muscle are modulated by active exercise training. So it's a very strong drug, the physical exercise. We also recently published in our official journal as International Federation of Sports Medicine an article together with the president of the European Federation of Sports Medicine Association, the effect of exercise training on autonomic cardiovascular regulation from cardiac patients to athletes. And the main outcomes of this study is that exercise training improves heart rate variability and baroflex sensitivity in chronic heart failure patients under beta blocker treatment. And HRV and BRS individual adaptation to exercise training are dose related, and exercise training should be regarded as effective non-pharmacological tool to improve neurovegetative control of the heart, thus having a fundamental role in secondary prevention of cardiovascular disease. And we, as a sports physician, we started to study cardiovascular, the heart rate variability, not to treat disease, but to assess the level of training and the risk of overtraining, about 50 to 20 in the field of prevention, secondary and primary prevention, the utilization of new technologies. The technological innovation in sports medicine can contribute to the diffusion of an active lifestyle, can contribute to improve performance and by optimizing training and competition, and may allow people with disability to obtain the benefits of an active living style. So, again, I stress this principle, reduction of the health costs related to the non-communicable disease. So, what is the take-home message? The take-home message is, of course, that promoting regular physical activity to improve and maintain the health of population in all different social settings as primary and secondary preventive measures. But to do this, dear colleagues, is necessary a global alliance that focuses on true collaboration and implementation of initiatives and programs with similar objectives but adapted to the social, cultural, and economical reality of the region. Imagine what we could achieve together instead of spending time and sources to independently reinvent the wheel as it is typically done. So it's really important that any group would merge and plan a global alliance. This is really important. Otherwise, we will maintain the borders, and science do not need borders. So this is the take-home message. The question mark for someone still, but for me is a must. We have to have a strategic global alliance. So in conclusion, take into consideration that non-communicable diseases are the world #1 killer. 70.9 million people die every year for cardiovascular disease. Multi-sectoral collaboration and cooperation at national, regional, and global levels are needed to reduce non-communicable disease-related morbidity, mortality, and disability. And sports medicine has a crucial role in primary and secondary prevention of non-communicable disease. And finally, sports medicine has an important role in the promotion of an active lifestyle among all age groups. And we are celebrating here the European Congress of Sport Medicine, and I'm proud, very proud to say, as a European, that Europe, the continent Europe, has been the first to address the importance of medicine and prevention through the promotion of sports medicine as a specialization. We have had in Europe the first school of specialization in sports medicine in Milano in 1957, and we started long time ago with Professor Backel the process for recognition, mutual recognition in the European Union countries of the specialization in sports medicine in all the European Union. Actually, we have 13 countries where the specialization is recognized as a full specialization, so we are at the finishing line to achieve this very important goal. Because sports medicine is not only medical care of athletes, is more and more prevention of disease through physical activity. I would like to show these slides. Sports medicine is, of course, education, is, of course, research, but is also prevention and innovation. You know, in many fields of sport, the innovation technology have been exported from Ferrari to the hospitals. You know very well how much you utilize the telemetric equipments in the hospital at the moment, but this was born not in healthcare, but was born in monitoring the performance of engines. And now we have achieved through sports, through the sports movement, also important results in the field of sports medicine. So with the wish that through physical education programs at international level, at a global level, what happened in the last year through the resolution of United Nations has been very, very important. We, as European Union citizens, we know very well that in many times Europe, the continent, is faster than the single country. So the resolution at a global level make possible the achievement of results also in the national level. So with this wish, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and again, thank you for the invitation to this conference. Thank you.
Any questions for Professor Figosi? Yes, please.
That physical activity is 50% powerful for reduction of all diseases, prevention, and so on. But if we would like to make people athletes, if we would like to make patients athletes, then we have to adapt metabolic support for physical activity. And both of you, also speaker before of you, introduced this concept, you know, moving society and all this. We also have to move through nutritional guidelines for moving society if we would like to get benefits from physical activity. I'm coming from clinical nutrition background, and we just had European Congress in clinical nutrition, and we were speaking so much about, for example, lean body mass as a first point in geriatrics. There are new guidelines for sarcopenia also. So we are just, you know, promoting physical activity and showing how to support this through also clinical nutrition. And these are not public health nutritional guidelines. Of course, this is a basic, but we have to go to personalized level. And here I think it's a great opportunity for Alliance. The president of European Society for Clinical Nutrition is also from Trieste, Rocco Barazzoni. So I think here we have to go align together to let people know how to eat if they are going to be athletes for health.
You know, I have projected a slide in my presentation where it has been clearly stressed that we can counteract most of the pathologies not only through physical activity, but also counteracting big problems coming from tobacco, alcohol abuse, and of course, overweight and obesity. So changing lifestyle is not only moving, is also better eating. I agree with you.
But just one point. Maybe we don't stress so much obesity. We have to stress healthy body composition. Because you can be obese and sarcopenic, and then the health is a problem, you know. And so we have to move forward. Before was already showed, you know, body composition device to measure. So I think we have, and also World Health Organization is likely moving through obesity concept to body composition concept, because muscle is important along health issues in the body.
Yes, of course, you are talking with a specialist in sports medicine as I am, and for me, the body composition is a must, because I remember when I was a young student, I see Professor Pecorelli there, you remember when they told us that adult have to have a weight correspondent to his centimeters over 1 meter. So if you are 1 meter and 80 centimeters, you have to have 80 kilograms weight without taking into consideration the body composition. Body composition is a must for us who are engaged in physical activity. Is measuring only the weight and the height is nonsense. And I can tell you the body composition also for us is a very important way to assess is if a physical exercise program is really effective or not, because the data are essential to assess. And, okay.
Thank you, Professor Pigossi. In a few minutes, we have the opening ceremony of the conference.
Thank you.
We're done with this conference. We can sit all night and talk about body composition, nutrition, exercise, but we need to move forward with, as you said, the guidelines, technology, and move forward. So let's move for the ceremony. Thank you for participating.